the medieval world gave rise to one of history's most enigmatic organizations, the Knights Templar. Born from the tumultuous aftermath of the First Crusade, this military order began as a small band of knights dedicated to protecting pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. Their evolution from humble protectors to an unprecedented power that influenced kings and popes represents one of the most remarkable institutional transformations of the Middle Ages. These warrior monks operated with remarkable autonomy, answering directly to the Pope and transcending traditional feudal obligations. Their distinctive white mantles with red crosses became symbols recognized across Europe and the Middle East, inspiring both reverence and fear. Within decades, they developed from a small protective brotherhood into a sophisticated organization, combining military excellence with revolutionary financial practices. The history of this order spans nearly 2 centuries, from 1119 to 1312 AD, intersecting with the Crusades, the development of early banking systems, and the shifting power dynamics between medieval Europe and the Islamic world. Their dramatic suppression, culminating in accusations of heresy, secret trials, and public executions, stands as one of history's most notorious cases of political conspiracy. What makes the Templar story particularly compelling is how it embodies the contradictions of medieval Christianity. Warrior monks who took vows of poverty while amassing great wealth. Religious men who engaged in diplomacy with Muslim leaders. And defenders of Christendom whose greatest enemies ultimately proved to be the very European powers they had long served. The year 1119 AD saw 9 French knights present themselves before King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with an unprecedented proposal for a new type of religious order. This moment marked the beginning of an institution that would reshape medieval politics, finance, and warfare. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The world that gave birth to the Knights Templar was one of profound transformation. As the 11th century drew to a close, Europe stood at a crossroads of faith, power, and ambition. To understand the emergence of this revolutionary military order, one must first comprehend the complex landscape from which it arose. A continent defined by feudalism, a powerful church, and a growing fascination with the Holy Land. Medieval European society operated under the feudal system, a hierarchical structure binding individuals through mutual obligations of service and protection. At its apex stood monarchs whose actual power often proved limited in practice. Below them, influential nobles controlled vast territories, through networks of vassals who pledged military service in exchange for land and security. This fragmented political landscape created a patchwork of competing interests across the continent, with violence and territorial disputes marking everyday life. The Catholic Church functioned as the unifying institution, transcending these political boundaries. By the late 11th century, it had evolved into the most powerful and far-reaching organization in Western Europe. The Cluniac reforms of previous decades had strengthened ecclesiastical independence from secular control and centralized authority under the papacy. Religious doctrine exerted tremendous influence over every aspect of medieval existence, from royal politics to peasant routines. Christian teachings provided the moral framework through which Europeans understood their world and their place within it. Under Pope Gregory VII, who led the Church from 1073 to 1085, religious authorities began asserting supremacy over secular powers in what scholars call the investiture controversy. This pivotal conflict centered on whether emperors or popes should appoint high church officials, but it represented a broader struggle over the relationship between spiritual and temporal authority. The humiliation of Emperor Henry IV at Canossa in 1077 where he reportedly stood barefoot in the snow for 3 days seeking papal forgiveness, symbolized the growing dominance of Rome's religious leadership. While Europe experienced these internal transformations, a vastly different civilization flourished across the Mediterranean. The Islamic world of the 11th century represented the pinnacle of contemporary achievement in numerous fields. From Baghdad to Cordoba, Muslim scholars preserved and expanded upon ancient Greek knowledge, advancing mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture, while European societies remained comparatively underdeveloped. The Holy City held profound religious significance for Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. For followers of Islam, it ranked as their third most sacred site after Mecca and Medina. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque stood as magnificent testimonies to Islamic reverence for this ancient center of faith. Since the 7th century conquest by Caliph Umar, successive Muslim rulers had generally permitted Christian pilgrims access to sacred locations, though conditions varied under different administrations. By the mid-11th century, control of the Holy Land had passed to the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt. However, regional stability deteriorated as the Seljuk Turks, recent converts to Islam, expanded their territory through military conquest. Their victory over Byzantine forces at Manzikert in 1071 dealt a devastating blow to the Eastern Roman Empire and dramatically altered the balance of power throughout the region. The Seljuk advance threatened established pilgrimage routes and intensified Western concern about access to sacred sites. For centuries, European Christians had undertaken arduous journeys to Palestine as acts of profound devotion. These pilgrimages represented both spiritual quests and forms of penance, with many believing that prayers offered at sacred locations provided special grace and forgiveness of sins. By the late 11th century, these religious journeys had grown increasingly perilous. Travelers faced not only natural hazards, disease, starvation, harsh weather, but also the constant threat of bandit attacks, particularly dangerous for vulnerable pilgrims carrying valuable offerings for holy shrines. Reports of mistreatment of Christian pilgrims, whether exaggerated or accurate, circulated throughout Europe. These accounts found a receptive audience in a continent already experiencing religious revival and heightened interest in expressions of piety. The concept of armed pilgrimage, combining devotional practice with military action, began to take shape in the European consciousness. Against this backdrop, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos sent envoys to Pope Urban II, requesting military assistance against the Seljuk Turks. While primarily concerned with reclaiming lost Byzantine territory, this appeal provided the catalyst for a much larger movement. At the Council of Clermont in November 1095, the Pope delivered a speech that would alter the course of history. Urban's address masterfully blended religious fervor with political calculation. He called upon Christian warriors to cease fighting among themselves and instead direct their martial energies toward reclaiming the Holy City. Deus vult, God wills it, became the rallying cry as thousands took up the cross, sewing it onto their garments as a symbol of their sacred vow to liberate Christ's birthplace. The pontiff offered significant spiritual incentives for participation, a plenary indulgence promising remission of all temporal punishment for sin. For medieval Christians deeply concerned with salvation, this spiritual reward provided powerful motivation. Additionally, the Eastern expedition offered second sons of nobility, those unlikely to inherit family estates, an opportunity for wealth, territory, and glory in distant lands. What followed was the First Crusade, an unprecedented military campaign beginning in 1096 that mobilized tens of thousands across Western Europe. After the disastrous People's Crusade, led by Peter the Hermit, ended in massacre, The main Crusader armies, comprised primarily of French and Norman knights, departed in August of that year. Against considerable odds, these forces captured Antioch in June 1098, after a grueling siege, and finally reached their ultimate destination in June 1099. The siege lasted just over a month before the walls were breached on July 15, 1099. What followed remains one of the darkest chapters in Crusader history. A brutal massacre of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants that shocked even contemporary chroniclers. Raymond of Aguilera, an eyewitness, described Christian warriors wading ankle-deep in blood at the Temple Mount. While likely embellished, such accounts reflect the extreme violence that accompanied the conquest. With their objectives secured, the victorious forces established the Kingdom of Jerusalem and several other Crusader states collectively known as Outremer, the land beyond the sea. Godfrey of Bouillon became the first ruler of the newly won territory, taking the humble title Defender of the Holy Sepulchre, rather than king. After his death in 1100, his brother Baldwin I accepted the crown, beginning a dynasty that would govern the sacred city for nearly 9 decades. This remarkable victory, however, created substantial challenges. Most Crusaders returned to Europe after fulfilling their religious vows, leaving the newly established Christian states severely undermanned. The remaining European population, a minority ruling over a predominantly Muslim populace, controlled only major urban centers and strategic routes, not the surrounding countryside. Their survival depended on maintaining secure connections to Europe for reinforcements, supplies, and new settlers. This tenuous situation made travel between coastal ports and inland holy sites exceedingly hazardous. Local hostile forces continued to control much of the surrounding territory, while bandits specifically targeted religious travelers along these vulnerable pathways. Christian pilgrims, having already endured arduous journeys across land and sea, frequently became victims of violence before reaching their sacred destinations. It was amid these perilous conditions that a French knight named Hugues de Payens conceived a radical solution, a religious order dedicated specifically to armed protection of pilgrims. In 1119, merely 20 years after the First Crusade's success, he and 8 fellow knights took solemn vows before Patriarch Warmond and King Baldwin II, establishing the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the embryonic brotherhoods that would develop into the legendary military order that transformed medieval society. In the early years of the 12th century, as Christian pilgrims continued to face deadly perils on their journeys to sacred sites, Hugues de Payens emerged as a man of vision and determination. A French knight from Champagne, with battle experience from the First Crusade, he recognized that the newly established Kingdom of Jerusalem faced a critical vulnerability: its inability to protect the faithful who traveled across its territories. Motivated by both religious devotion and practical concern, Hugues gathered 8 fellow knights who shared his vision. Historical records preserve some of their names: Godfrey de Saint-Omer, Payen de Montdidier, Archambault de Saint-Amand, André de Montbard, Geoffrey Bissol, and Gondomar. These men represented the flower of European knighthood, trained warriors who had mastered the arts of mounted combat and possessed considerable battlefield experience. What distinguished their enterprise from typical knightly endeavors was its spiritual dimension. In a solemn ceremony before King Baldwin II and Patriarch Warmond, these 9 knights took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, an unprecedented combination of religious dedication and martial prowess. They pledged themselves to a mission unlike any previously conceived: armed protection of vulnerable pilgrims traveling the dangerous roads between the coastal port of Jaffa and the inland holy sites. Their timing proved fortunate. King Baldwin II recognized the potential value of such a dedicated protective force. The young kingdom faced constant threats from surrounding Muslim territories, and its limited military resources was stretched thin, defending urban centers and strategic fortifications. A mobile force specifically tasked with securing travel routes addressed a critical need that royal forces could not adequately meet. In a gesture that would prove historically significant, Baldwin granted the nascent Brotherhood quarters on the Temple Mount, in a wing of his royal palace adjacent to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This location held profound symbolic importance. Built upon the ruins of what Christians believed to be Solomon's temple, it represented the spiritual heart of the holy city. The Knights adopted their name from this prestigious headquarters, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The choice of the Temple Mount as their base carried multiple layers of meaning. In practical terms, it provided a strategic location from which to organize their patrols. Symbolically, it connected the order to biblical traditions of sacred guardianship. Some scholars suggest that the founders may have been influenced by stories of the ancient Levites who guarded Solomon's original temple. This connection to sacred history would become an important element of the order's identity and mystique. Despite royal support, the Brotherhood initially operated with extremely limited resources. Contemporary accounts describe them as so impoverished that two knights would share a single horse, an image later immortalized in their famous seal depicting two mounted men on one steed. Their early equipment consisted of donated garments and weapons, and they relied on charitable contributions for sustenance. This genuine poverty aligned with their monastic vows and distinguished them from the often ostentatious display of secular knighthood. Their daily activities focused on armed escorts for pilgrim groups along the most dangerous stretches of road, particularly the route from the coastal landing at Jaffa through the bandit-infested hills to sacred destinations. Using techniques developed during the Crusade, they organized travelers into protected convoys, positioned armed knights at front and rear, and maintained vigilant watch for ambush attempts. Contemporary accounts credit them with immediately reducing pilgrim casualties through these systematic protective measures. For nearly a decade, the Brotherhood operated in this humble capacity, gradually building a reputation for disciplined effectiveness and religious dedication. Yet despite their practical success, they faced skepticism from both religious and secular quarters. The concept of warrior monks represented a contradiction to many medieval minds. Traditional monastic orders emphasized peace, humility, and separation from worldly affairs, while knightly values celebrated martial prowess, honor, and secular glory. By combining these seemingly incompatible ideals, the Temple Knights challenged established social categories. The European religious establishment expressed particular concern about armed monks. How could men who shed blood, even in righteous cause, fulfill the spiritual ideals of monastic life? This theological question required resolution before the Brotherhood could gain wider acceptance and support. Their unusual status also raised practical questions of governance and accountability. As knights, should they answer to secular authorities? As monks, did they fall under church jurisdiction? Their unique position between these worlds created administrative ambiguities that troubled both royal and ecclesiastical officials. Despite these conceptual challenges, the practical value of their service generated growing support. Additional knights, inspired by their example, sought to join their ranks. Pilgrims who had benefited from their protection spread word of their effectiveness throughout Christendom. Their distinctive appearance, initially distinguished only by simple white mantles symbolizing their purity of purpose, became recognized along the roads of the Holy Land. News of this innovative order eventually reached influential ears in Europe, particularly those of Bernard, Abbot of Clairvaux, a nephew of one of the founding knights, André de Montbarrat. Bernard possessed unparalleled moral authority as the leading religious figure of his age. His intellectual brilliance and reputation for holiness made him the perfect advocate for the fledgling brotherhood. Though initially skeptical of the concept of warrior monks, Bernard came to recognize their potential as a force for righteous protection. Hugues de Payens recognized that for his order to expand its mission, it needed formal recognition from the highest authorities of Western Christendom. Around 1127, nearly a decade after the order's founding, he led a small delegation to Europe, seeking papal approval and additional recruits. This journey would transform the modest brotherhood into something far more significant than its founders likely envisioned. The timing of this European mission coincided with mounting concerns about the security of the Crusader states. Military setbacks had highlighted the precarious position of Christian territories in the East, generating renewed interest in supporting their defense. Hugues skillfully presented his order as part of the solution to this pressing problem. Dedicated warriors who combined religious discipline with military effectiveness, traveling through France, England, Scotland, and Flanders, Hugues attracted significant attention from nobility, impressed by the order's mission. His most important audience came at the Council of Troyes in January 1129, where an assembly of ecclesiastical authorities gathered to consider the brotherhood's status. Here, with Bernard of Clairvaulx's powerful advocacy, the poor fellow soldiers received formal recognition from the Church. This council marked a crucial turning point in the order's development. With Bernard's guidance, a formal rule was established for the brotherhood, drawing from the Benedictine and Cistercian traditions, but adapted to their unique military mission. This document codified both their spiritual obligations and their martial responsibilities, providing the structural framework for institutional growth. Bernard further legitimized their mission by composing a treatise titled In Praise of the New Knighthood, a theological justification for armed monks that resolved many of the religious concerns about their dual nature. The rule established a clear organizational hierarchy, with the Grand Master at its head, supported by various officers, including the seneschal, marshal, and draper. It prescribed daily religious observances alongside military training, creating a structured life that balanced spiritual and martial duties. It also established strict behavioral codes. Knights were forbidden from hunting for sport, gambling, or engaging with women, even female relatives. Their appearance was regulated down to the length of their hair and beards, creating a distinctly austere image that visually separated them from secular knights. Following this official recognition, Pope Honorius II placed the order directly under papal authority, exempting them from obligations to local bishops and secular rulers. This extraordinary autonomy would prove crucial to their future development, allowing them to operate across political boundaries as an international organization answerable only to Rome. The white mantle that had been their simple identifier now received an official distinction: a red cross added by Pope Eugenius III as a symbol of martyrdom. This striking visual emblem became their most recognizable feature, inspiring respect and, sometimes, fear across two continents. With church endorsement and a growing reputation, donations began flowing to the order from across Europe. Wealthy nobles gifted land, castles, and incomes to support their mission. Young knights, particularly younger sons without inheritance prospects, sought membership in increasing numbers. What had begun as 9 knights sharing horses had transformed, within a single decade, into an internationally recognized institution with exponentially growing resources. As the Brothers of the Temple returned to the Holy Land, following their European mission, they bore with them not only new recruits and material wealth, but also a transformed identity. No longer merely a local protective brotherhood, they had become the first military religious order in Christian history, a revolutionary institution that would reshape warfare, finance, and religious life in ways their humble founders could scarcely have imagined. The Crusader states established in the aftermath of the First Crusade existed in a political landscape unlike anything in contemporary Europe, collectively known as Outre-mer, meaning the land beyond the sea. These Christian territories, carved from Muslim-controlled regions, represented a unique experiment in medieval governance. To understand the rise of the Templar order, one must comprehend the complex political environment in which they operated. Foremost among these states stood the Kingdom of Jerusalem, stretching from the Mediterranean coast to the Jordan River. Surrounding it were the county of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the county of Edessa, each with its own ruler, laws, and strategic concerns. These territories formed a narrow coastal strip of Christian governance, surrounded by powerful Muslim states on nearly all sides. The political foundation of these Crusader states rested on an uneasy transplantation of European feudalism onto Middle Eastern soil. Baldwin I, crowned as Jerusalem's first king, established a feudal hierarchy with European nobles granted fiefs in exchange for military service. Yet this system faced immediate challenges in the Middle Eastern context. The shortage of European settlers meant that local administration often relied on indigenous Christian and Muslim officials. Unlike Europe's relatively stable boundaries, frontiers in Outre-mer remained fluid, with territories changing hands frequently through conquest or treaty. The Kingdom of Jerusalem developed distinctive political institutions, reflecting its unique circumstances. The High Court, composed of major feudal lords, both advised the monarch and limited royal authority. Unlike European kingdoms, where hereditary succession was the norm, Jerusalem's crown was technically elective, though typically passing within the same dynasty. When male heirs were lacking, women could, and did, inherit the throne, a practice more common in Outre-mer than in Europe. This created complex scenarios where queens regnant or their consorts wielded power, sometimes leading to succession disputes that weakened the kingdom at critical moments. Templar knights entered this intricate political web as both participants and independent actors. Their relationship with successive kings of Jerusalem evolved considerably over time. During the earliest years, under Baldwin II, who had granted them their headquarters on Temple Mount, the Brotherhood enjoyed royal favor and protection while they established their mission. Their primary function, securing roads for pilgrims, aligned perfectly with royal interests in maintaining safe passage throughout the realm. As their wealth and military capacity grew, the Templar order gradually assumed broader responsibilities within the kingdom's defense structure. By mid-century, they had begun constructing and garrisoning strategic castles along vulnerable frontiers. This development transformed them from a supplementary security force into essential military infrastructure. Kings increasingly relied on Templar strongholds to extend royal authority into regions where direct crown control remained tenuous. The political position of the military orders grew more complex during the reign of King Fulk, former Count of Anjou, who ruled Jerusalem through his marriage to Queen Melisande. As a newcomer to Outremer politics, folk sought reliable allies among the nobility. The Templars, with their growing international prestige and direct papal connection, offered a valuable counterbalance to entrenched local interests that sometimes challenged royal authority. However, this relationship contained inherent tensions. The Templars' exemption from royal taxation and their direct accountability to the Pope created a quasi-independent power center within the kingdom's borders. When royal and Templar interests aligned, this arrangement strengthened the realm. When they diverged, it created friction that undermined unified action against external threats. Beyond Jerusalem, the Brotherhood established political relationships throughout the other Crusade estates. In the county of Tripoli, they received extensive land grants from Count Raymond II, including strategic mountain passes controlling access to the interior. In Antioch, they maintained a more cautious relationship with princes often entangled in Byzantine politics. Their presence in northernmost Edessa remained limited until that county's fall to Muslim forces, a catastrophe that highlighted the vulnerability of isolated Christian territories. The political complexity of Outremer extended beyond its internal Christian governance to relations with neighboring Muslim powers. Contrary to popular conceptions of constant religious warfare, diplomatic engagement and negotiated coexistence characterized many periods. Trade connections remained vital to economic survival, creating interdependencies that sometimes transcended religious divisions. Treaties establishing temporary truces or defining spheres of influence were common diplomatic tools, with the Templars occasionally serving as intermediaries in these negotiations due to their reputation for adhering strictly to agreements. The Brotherhood's growing political influence drew them into factional struggles that plagued the Crusade estates. Noble families frequently competed for power and position, forming alliances that shifted according to immediate interests rather than consistent principles. European-born crusaders often clashed with second-generation settlers born in the East, whom they derisively called Pula. These locally born Franks had developed different perspectives on coexistence with Muslim neighbors, sometimes advocating accommodation policies that newcomers viewed as compromising Christian interests. Within this factional landscape, the Templars generally aligned with hardline positions, emphasizing military solutions to territorial security. That perspective stemmed from practical experience protecting vulnerable travelers against raiders who exploited any weakness in defense. This stance sometimes placed them at odds with rulers seeking diplomatic arrangements to compensate for chronic military shortages. Relations between the military orders themselves added another layer of political complexity. The Hospitallers, originally founded as a medical organization caring for pilgrims, had evolved their own military branch partly in response to Templar success. Though serving complementary functions, the two orders developed an intense rivalry for donations, recruits, and influence. This competition occasionally erupted into open conflict, requiring royal or papal intervention to restore cooperation. The political landscape shifted dramatically following the disastrous Battle of Hattin and subsequent fall of Jerusalem to Saladin's forces. With the kingdom's capital lost and its territory reduced to a few coastal cities, political authority fragmented further. In this crisis atmosphere, the military orders, with their independent financing and international recruitment networks, gained even greater influence relative to weakened secular rulers. Throughout these political evolutions, the Templars faced a fundamental challenge, balancing their specific spiritual mission with pragmatic engagement in worldly politics. Their rule committed them to protecting Christian interests in the Holy Land. Yet effective protection required political maneuvering, that sometimes compromised monastic ideals. Individual Grand Masters navigated this tension differently, some maintaining strict independence from political entanglements, others becoming deeply involved in the governance of Outremer. By the latter half of the 12th century, the order had become indispensable to the political survival of the Crusader states. Their castles formed the backbone of territorial defense. Their financial resources supported struggling royal treasuries. Their diplomatic connections facilitated external alliances. Yet this very indispensability created growing resentment among some secular authorities who found their own power increasingly constrained by Templar influence. The complicated politics of Outremer shaped the Templar order as much as the order shaped the region's politics. From humble beginnings as road guardians, they had evolved into sophisticated political actors, balancing multiple roles: military defenders, financial power brokers, and representatives of papal interests in the East. This political evolution laid the groundwork for their subsequent rise to international prominence, while also sowing seeds of the tensions that would eventually contribute to their downfall. The transformation of a small brotherhood of protective knights into a powerful international order required more than just papal recognition. It demanded a comprehensive framework governing every aspect of members' lives, from prayer schedules to battlefield conduct. This framework came in the form of the Templar Rule, a remarkable document that blended monastic discipline with military necessity. The rule's creation at the Council of Troyes marked a watershed moment in the order's development. Bernard of Clairvaux, the most influential religious figure of his age, played a central role in its formulation. His treatise, in praise of the new knighthood, provided the theological foundation necessary for this revolutionary concept. In these writings, Bernard distinguished the Templars from secular knights, whom he criticized for vanity, ostentation, and fighting for personal glory. The Templars, by contrast, represented a new ideal: men who fought not for worldly recognition, but for the protection of the innocent and defense of Christendom. The knight who protects his soul with the armor of faith as he covers his body with an armor of steel, wrote Bernard. He is truly fearless and safe on either count. Having his body protected by armor of steel and his soul by armor of faith, he fears neither demons nor men. This powerful endorsement from such a revered figure silenced many critics who had questioned whether warfare and monastic life could coexist. The original Latin rule consisted of 72 articles establishing the spiritual and organizational foundation of the order. Over subsequent decades, it expanded significantly, with additional sections addressing specific situations and adding nuance to its regulations. The document covered everything from daily prayer requirements to proper horseback riding techniques, creating a comprehensive guide for Templar life. At the apex of the organizational structure stood the Grand Master, elected for life by an assembly of senior brothers. This position combined spiritual authority with military command, requiring both piety and strategic acumen. The Grand Master presided over the central governing body, known as the chapter, where major decisions affecting the entire order were made collaboratively with input from senior members. Below the Grand Master served various officers with specific responsibilities. The seneschal functioned as deputy leader and administrator. The marshal oversaw military operations, training, and equipment. The commander of the Kingdom of Jerusalem managed affairs in the order's spiritual homeland. The draper supervised clothing and personal equipment distribution. The treasurer controlled financial matters, an increasingly complex role as the order's wealth grew. Each regional division, called a commandery, had its own leadership hierarchy, reporting ultimately to the Grand Master. This sophisticated administrative structure enabled effective management across vast geographical distances at a time when communication typically moved at the speed of horseback. While the Grand Master maintained ultimate authority, practical necessity required substantial autonomy. For regional commanders who might wait months for instructions from headquarters, beyond organizational structure, the rule established a distinct class system within the order. Full Knight brothers, who came exclusively from noble backgrounds, formed the elite military corps. Sergeant brothers, drawn from non-noble origins, served in supporting combat roles and managed many administrative functions. Chaplain brothers, ordained priests, attended to the spiritual needs of members. Serving brothers handled essential services from blacksmithing to cooking. This hierarchical arrangement reflected medieval social divisions, while creating a functional system where each member understood his specific responsibilities. Daily life, under the rule, followed a disciplined schedule, balancing religious observance with military duties. Brothers rose before dawn for prayers, attended multiple religious services throughout the day, and maintained regular periods of silence. Between these spiritual obligations, knights trained in combat techniques, cared for horses and equipment, and performed assigned duties. This rigorous routine created the disciplined force that distinguished Templar knights on the battlefield. The religious aspects of the rule drew heavily from Cistercian practices, reflecting Bernard's influence. Mandatory attendance at canonical hours, regular prayer times spread throughout the day and night, maintained the monastic character of the order, even during military campaigns. When separated from their communities by military duty, brothers were expected to replace missed services with recitations of the Lord's Prayer. Vows of personal poverty, chastity, and obedience formed the cornerstone of Templar spiritual life. Unlike traditional monks, however, the order itself could and did accumulate substantial wealth for its institutional mission. Individual members renounced all personal possessions upon joining. A knight could own neither money nor property, and received standardized clothing and equipment from the order's stores. Even receiving gifts without permission from superiors constituted a serious violation of the rule. The vow of chastity extended beyond sexual abstinence to encompass broader concepts of moral purity. Knights were forbidden from kissing any woman, including mothers and sisters. They could not be alone with females, share water for hand-washing with them, or even accept personal care from them when ill. These strict prohibitions aimed to eliminate temptations and maintain the brotherhood's spiritual focus. Obedience constituted perhaps the most critical vow for a military order. On the battlefield, hesitation or independent action could prove fatal to an entire unit. The rule demanded immediate compliance with orders from superiors, creating the disciplined force that made Templar units exceptionally effective in combat. This absolute obedience extended to all aspects of daily life, with members surrendering personal autonomy for the collective mission. Diet, clothing, and personal appearance fell under strict regulation. Meals consisted primarily of vegetable dishes, with meat permitted only 3 times weekly. Brothers ate in silence while listening to scriptural readings, maintaining the contemplative atmosphere of traditional monasteries, even while preparing for warfare. The distinctive white mantle marked full knights, while sergeant brothers wore brown or black garments, all bearing the red cross after papal authorization of this symbol. Personal grooming requirements reflected both practical military considerations and spiritual symbolism. Regular haircuts prevented long hair from hampering vision in battle, while neatly trimmed beards distinguished the brothers from fashionable secular knights, who often went clean-shaven. These regulations created a visually distinctive force immediately recognizable on medieval battlefields. Discipline within the order relied on a graduated system of penances for infractions. Minor violations might result in temporary meal restrictions or additional prayers. Moderate offenses could lead to flogging or isolation from the community. The most serious transgressions, especially those threatening the order's reputation or mission, resulted in expulsion, effectively ending a knight's career and identity. The rule addressed battlefield conduct in considerable detail, balancing strategic flexibility with ethical constraints. Knights received strict instructions never to retreat, unless outnumbered by at least 3-1, establishing the fearsome reputation for standing firm that made them valuable in crusader armies. Discipline in combat formation was paramount. No brother could charge ahead independently, even when victory seemed certain, without permission from commanders. Perhaps most remarkably for its era, the rule included provisions for treating captives humanely and honoring truces with Muslim forces. While committed to defending Christian territories, the order recognized practical necessities of coexistence in frontier regions. This pragmatic approach sometimes created tension, with crusade leaders advocating more absolute positions against Muslim neighbors. As the order expanded geographically, the rule adapted to diverse conditions across Europe and the Near East. European commanderies, far from battlefield pressures, emphasized economic productivity and recruitment. Eastern preceptories focused on military readiness and defensive infrastructure. This flexibility allowed the order to maintain its essential character while adjusting to regional circumstances. The Templar rule's comprehensive nature made it a revolutionary document in medieval institutional history. By successfully integrating seemingly contradictory vocations, monk and warrior, it created a new model that other military orders would emulate. The Hospitallers developed their own military branch with similar regulations, while the Teutonic Knights adopted many Templar organizational structures. Beyond its immediate application, the rule reflected deeper currents in medieval religious thought. Its emphasis on purposeful action, rather than contemplative withdrawal, aligned with broader reforms emphasizing practical Christianity, engaged with worldly problems. The Templar Knight, fighting for righteous cause rather than personal glory, embodied an ideal of sanctified violence that helped reconcile Christian teachings with the violent realities of medieval society. For nearly 2 centuries, this remarkable document guided one of history's most distinctive organizations. Its balance of spiritual discipline with military effectiveness created the foundation for the Templars' rise to unprecedented power and influence across medieval Europe and the Near East. Through careful regulation of every aspect of members' lives, the rule transformed individual knights into components of an institutional juggernaut that would reshape medieval history. Following their official recognition at the Council of Troyes, the Templar Order experienced a period of extraordinary expansion that transformed them from a small protective brotherhood into one of the most powerful institutions in medieval Europe. This remarkable ascent rested on several interconnected factors: strategic land acquisition, military innovation, royal patronage, and an organizational structure that transcended political boundaries. Throughout Europe, noble families competed to support the order with generous donations. Whether motivated by genuine religious devotion or seeking spiritual merit to offset worldly sins, lords across the continent gifted extensive properties to the Brotherhood. A typical charter from this period reads, "I, Count Raymond, grant to God and the Knights of the Temple, the castle of Barbera, with all its lands and rights, for the salvation of my soul and those of my parents, thousands of similar bequests accumulated rapidly, creating a vast network of Templar holdings, stretching from Scotland to the Mediterranean. These properties took various forms, reflecting the diverse economies of medieval Europe. Agricultural estates provided sustainable income through rents and produce. Urban buildings in growing commercial centers generated steady revenue streams. Carefully situated castles controlled important trade routes and reinforced the order's military presence. Each donation, regardless of size, contributed to an expanding economic foundation that supported their core mission in the Holy Land. The management of this rapidly growing portfolio required sophisticated administrative systems. Local commanderies, each under the authority of a preceptor, operated as semi-autonomous units responsible for maximizing the productivity of regional holdings. A percentage of all revenues flowed eastward to support frontier operations, creating a continuous transfer of European resources to Outremer. This financial pipeline gave Templar forces in the east significant advantages over other Crusader contingents that relied on sporadic funding from distant patrons. While expanding territorially across Europe, the Order simultaneously established their iconic headquarters in Paris, the Temple. This fortified complex near the current site of Place de la République served as their administrative center for Western operations. Its massive stone tower contained the Order's treasury, archives, and central banking operations. Kings and nobles deposited valuables in its secure vaults, recognizing the superior protection offered by this heavily guarded complex. The Paris Temple became so central to French governance that it frequently hosted royal councils and served as the treasury for the French monarchy. In England, their London headquarters, known as the New Temple, provided similar functions for English royalty. King John stored the crown jewels there, while Henry III utilized Templar financial expertise to manage royal accounts. Across Europe, Templar preceptories became integral to local economic and political systems, transforming the order from foreign visitors into essential institutional infrastructure. The strategic value of the Brotherhood extended beyond their economic contributions. Their castles occupied critical defensive positions throughout Christian territories, forming a network of fortifications that complemented royal defensive systems. In the Holy Land, Templar strongholds like Château Pèlerin stood as imposing symbols of Christian military power, controlling key routes and providing secure bases for operations against hostile forces. Castle architecture under Templar direction reflected sophisticated military engineering principles, some adapted from Byzantine and Muslim examples. Concentric defensive rings, carefully designed killing zones, and arrow slits positioned for maximum coverage demonstrated their practical approach to defensive design. Their fortresses pioneered innovations like bent entranceways that prevented battering rams from building momentum and murder holes, allowing defenders to attack enemies who breached the outer defenses. Regional differences in castle construction illustrated the Order's adaptability to varied environments. In desert regions, water conservation, features like massive cisterns, received primary emphasis. Mountain castles incorporated natural terrain into their defensive systems. Coastal fortifications included facilities for naval support. This pragmatic approach to military architecture, emphasizing function over display, typified the Templar methodology in all operational aspects. The Brotherhood's military effectiveness stemmed not only from their fortifications, but also from innovative battlefield tactics. Regular training created disciplined units capable of complex maneuvers rarely achieved by feudal levies. Templars pioneered the use of standardized commands and signals, allowing rapid response to changing battlefield conditions. The Order maintained strict formation discipline, with knights forbidden from breaking ranks to pursue individual glory, a common weakness in other Crusader forces. Their distinctive fighting approach reflected a pragmatic appreciation for Middle Eastern battlefield realities. Heavy European cavalry tactics required adaptation to the lighter, more mobile forces of their adversaries. Templar units developed hybrid approaches, combining Western shock combat with elements of Eastern mobile warfare. They maintained specialized scouting units familiar with local terrain and trained in reading subtle signs of enemy movement. Unlike many European commanders who dismissed Muslim tactics as dishonorable, Templar leaders studied and adapted effective enemy techniques when advantageous. Horse breeding represented another area of Templar excellence. The order maintained extensive stud farms dedicated to producing war horses, with the specific characteristics needed for armored combat in Middle Eastern conditions. These animals required not just size and strength, but also heat tolerance and sustainable endurance. Templars crossbred European destriers with Arabian stock, creating mounts particularly suited to their operational environment. Their expertise became so renowned that European nobles sought Templar advice on improving their own breeding programs. The Second Crusade offered the first major opportunity for Templars to demonstrate their expanding capabilities. When European armies under Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany marched east, Templar contingents provided critical support services. Their knowledge of local conditions, superior logistics, and disciplined forces stood in stark contrast to the disorganized main Crusader armies. After the Crusade's failure, many blamed poor planning and leadership rather than Templar contributions, enhancing rather than diminishing the order's reputation. Throughout subsequent decades, the Brotherhood continued expanding their military involvement in defending the Crusader states. By the mid-12th century, they had grown from auxiliary escorts into an essential component of frontline defense. Their role in the Battle of Montjuic, where a significantly outnumbered Crusader force defeated Saladin's army, cemented their reputation for battlefield effectiveness. Contemporary chroniclers credited Templar discipline with maintaining formation cohesion at critical moments during this improbable victory. Their military evolution reflected the influential leadership of successive grandmasters, particularly André de Montbard, the fifth to hold this office. Uncle to Bernard of Clairvaux and one of the order's founding knights, André combined spiritual authority with practical military experience. During his leadership, the Brotherhood refined their distinctive combination of monastic discipline and martial effectiveness. His personal connections to prominent European nobles facilitated donations that significantly expanded their resource base. Under his guidance, the order developed standardized training methods that transformed recruits from diverse backgrounds into a cohesive fighting force. Unlike haphazard training typical in feudal armies, Templar knights underwent systematic preparation, emphasizing specific skills required for their unique mission. Combat techniques, horsemanship, and formation maneuvers received equal emphasis alongside spiritual instruction, creating warriors whose battlefield discipline stemmed directly from religious commitment. While the Templars' military contributions received the most attention from contemporary chroniclers, their logistical innovations proved equally significant. The order developed sophisticated supply systems maintaining secure routes between their Mediterranean ports and inland garrisons. They constructed specialized storage facilities for preserving food in desert heat, and established relay stations ensuring fresh mounts for messengers carrying time-sensitive information. These unglamorous but essential capabilities allowed sustained operations in environments that regularly defeated other Crusader forces through attrition and supply failure. Their engineering corps became renowned for rapid bridge construction, siege engine design, and water management in arid regions. When Crusader armies required specialized equipment for particular campaigns, Templar workshops frequently provided both the expertise and materials. Their practical approach favored effectiveness over tradition, willingly adopting techniques from Byzantine and Muslim engineers when these offered advantages over European methods. By the latter half of the 12th century, the order had achieved unprecedented status within European society. Kings sought their military advice, nobles emulated their organizational methods, and commoners viewed them with a mixture of awe and mystique. Their distinctive white mantles marked with red crosses had become recognized symbols of Christian military power from Scotland to Syria. The humble brotherhood, founded to protect pilgrims, had evolved into an international institution, wielding influence at the highest levels of medieval society. This meteoric rise contained inherent contradictions that would eventually contribute to their downfall. The vast wealth necessary to support their military mission created tension with their nominal vow of poverty. Their exemption from episcopal authority and direct accountability only to the Pope generated friction with local church hierarchies. Their international structure, transcending political boundaries, sometimes placed them at odds with emerging nation-states, increasingly assertive about sovereignty within their territories. Yet during their ascendant period, these contradictions remained manageable through careful diplomacy and the demonstrable value of their services. The order's pragmatic leadership generally maintained sufficient political awareness to navigate complex relationships with diverse patrons. Their strict internal discipline minimized scandals that might damage their reputation, while their ongoing military contributions in defense of Christendom justified their special privileges in the eyes of most contemporaries. This golden age of Templar influence would eventually face its greatest challenge in the catastrophic events surrounding the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin's forces. Yet even this disaster, which fundamentally altered the crusading enterprise, would initially reinforce, rather than diminish, the order's importance. As secular forces proved inadequate to the defense of the Holy Land, the disciplined, well-funded military orders emerged as the most reliable bulwark against Muslim reconquest, setting the stage for the next chapter in their remarkable institutional journey. While the image of armored knights on horseback dominates popular conceptions of the Templar order, their mastery of medieval warfare extended well beyond land battles. By the mid-12th century, the Brotherhood had developed a substantial maritime presence that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. This naval dimension of Templar operations represented a strategic innovation, as significant as their land-based military contributions. The geographical realities of the Crusader states necessitated maritime expertise. Christian territories in the Levant depended entirely on sea connections to Europe for reinforcements, supplies, and communication. Any interruption to these maritime lifelines threatened the very survival of Outremer. Muslim naval forces understood this vulnerability and frequently targeted Christian shipping, while pirates operated from countless hidden coves along the coastline, preying on merchant vessels and pilgrim transports alike. Recognizing these challenges, the Templar leadership made a strategic decision to develop their own naval capabilities. This expansion into maritime operations began modestly, with the acquisition of several merchant vessels to transport supplies from Europe to their eastern commanderies. Initial ships served primarily logistical functions, carrying horses, weapons, and recruits to support land operations. However, the Brotherhood quickly recognized that effective logistics required protected sea lanes, pushing them toward development of dedicated war galleys, the Templars established their primary naval base at the port of Acre, constructing specialized facilities for vessel maintenance and operation. Stone quays, shipyards, and warehouses formed an impressive complex that contemporary visitors described as rivaling facilities in major European ports. Additional maritime installations at Tyre, Jaffa, and several smaller harbors created a network of safe havens for Templar vessels patrolling the Levantine coast. Their fleet consisted of several vessel types, each serving specific functions within their maritime strategy. Galleys with shallow drafts proved ideal for coastal patrol and pursuit of pirate craft. Larger transport vessels called naves carried heavy cargo, including the war horses essential to Templar military operations. Specialized pilgrim ships featured reinforced decks, accommodating the hundreds of travelers who journeyed to fulfill religious vows. By the height of their naval power, accounts suggest the Brotherhood maintained several dozen vessels operating throughout the Mediterranean. The operation of this fleet required specialized knowledge, absent from traditional knightly training. The order addressed this need by creating a dedicated marine branch within their structure. Templar mariners developed expertise in navigation, ship handling, and naval combat tactics. Command positions typically went to knights with demonstrated aptitude for maritime operations, while experienced sailors from Italian maritime republics often served as technical specialists, bringing advanced seafaring knowledge into the Brotherhood's service. Templar naval operations fulfilled multiple strategic objectives beyond simple transport. Regular patrols along pilgrim sea routes dramatically reduced pirate attacks on vulnerable traveler ships. Convoy systems, grouping merchant vessels under Templar protection, improved commercial security, strengthening economic connections between East and West. Naval forces provided critical support for coastal castles, delivering supplies and reinforcements to installations that would otherwise remain vulnerable to siege. The strategic value of Templar maritime capabilities became particularly evident during the Third Crusade. When Christian forces undertook the siege of Acre, Templar vessels maintained a critical naval blockade, preventing Muslim relief ships from reaching the defended city. They transported siege equipment too massive for land travel and evacuated wounded soldiers for treatment at rear areas. This multidimensional support proved essential to the eventual Christian recapture of this vital port city. Beyond military applications, Templar ships provided critical transportation services for the broader Crusader enterprise. When European nobles and their retinues traveled east to fulfill crusading vows, they frequently booked passage on Templar vessels, recognizing their superior safety record and reliable scheduling. Pilgrims of more modest means, similarly, sought Templar transport when available, willing to pay premium fares for the security these ships provided. The Brotherhood developed standardized fare structures and established regular sailing schedules between major Mediterranean ports, creating an early form of organized passenger service. The maritime expertise developed for military purposes yielded significant commercial benefits as well. Templar ships engaged in trade during peaceful periods, transporting valuable Eastern goods to European markets and carrying Western products eastward. The profits from these commercial voyages helped finance the Order's broader military mission, while strengthening economic ties between distant regions. Their reputation for honest dealings and reliable delivery made Templar vessels preferred carriers for high-value cargo, requiring secure transport. The Brotherhood demonstrated remarkable innovation in their naval operations. Their ships incorporated design elements from both Western and Eastern maritime traditions, creating hybrid vessels particularly suited to Mediterranean conditions. Western-style deep hulls provided stability and cargo capacity, while Eastern-influenced Latine sails offered superior maneuverability in the variable winds characteristic of the Eastern Mediterranean. This pragmatic approach to naval architecture typified the Templar methodology of adopting effective techniques regardless of origin. Navigational practices similarly combined traditions from multiple seafaring cultures. Templar mariners utilized astronomical navigation techniques learned from Muslim sailors, alongside Western methods based on coastal landmarks and rudimentary charts. During nighttime operations, they employed signal lanterns, arranged in standardized patterns to maintain fleet cohesion, a system more advanced than contemporary European navies used. These technical innovations gave Templar vessels operational advantages that magnified their effectiveness despite relatively modest fleet size. The naval dimension of Templar power significantly enhanced their political position within the Crusader states. Control over critical maritime routes gave them leverage in negotiations with secular authorities, perpetually concerned about communication with Europe. When political disputes arose between European powers operating in the East, Templar naval neutrality often provided the only reliable transport option for diplomats traveling to reconciliation conferences. This maritime power complemented their land-based military strength, creating a comprehensive security capability, unmatched by any secular authority in Outremer. This naval expertise proved particularly valuable during periods of territorial setback. When inland areas fell to Muslim forces, coastal strongholds maintained by the military orders became the primary Christian footholds in the region. The ability to supply these positions from the sea ensured their viability even when surrounded by hostile territory. Following the catastrophic Battle of Hattin and subsequent loss of Jerusalem, Templar naval capabilities played a crucial role in maintaining the surviving coastal fragments of the Crusader states. Maritime operations presented unique challenges for an order bound by monastic vows. Life aboard medieval vessels involved hardships and dangers unfamiliar to land-based commanderies. Extended voyages required adaptations to regular prayer schedules and dietary restrictions. The Brotherhood developed specialized regulations for seafaring members, balancing spiritual obligations with practical necessities of maritime life. Ship chaplains conducted religious services adapted to naval conditions, maintaining the order's spiritual character even in this specialized branch. The Templar fleet reached its zenith of influence in the decades following the Third Crusade. With Jerusalem lost and Christian territory reduced to coastal regions, naval power became proportionally more important to Outremer's survival. The Brotherhood's ships maintained essential connections between isolated Christian outposts that would otherwise have been impossible to defend. Their maritime patrols represented a significant deterrent to Muslim naval forces, considering attacks on vulnerable coastal positions. Archaeological evidence from Templar port facilities reveals the sophisticated infrastructure supporting their naval operations. Excavations at Acre have uncovered specialized storage facilities for marine equipment, workshops for sail production, and slipways designed for efficient vessel maintenance. These physical remains confirm contemporary accounts describing highly organized maritime activities, operating according to standardized procedures. The substantial investment in these facilities demonstrates the strategic importance the order placed on their naval capabilities. Though less celebrated than their mounted knights, Templar mariners made equally crucial contributions to the order's mission and reputation. Their mastery of Mediterranean seafaring extended the Brotherhood's protective reach beyond land routes to encompass the sea lanes connecting Europe with the Holy Land. This comprehensive approach to security, spanning both terrestrial and maritime domains, established the Templars as the indispensable guardians of Christian interests in the East. The maritime legacy of the Templar Order outlived their presence in the Levant. When Christian territories in the Holy Land finally fell, elements of their naval expertise transferred to other maritime powers, particularly Portugal, where many Templar resources were absorbed by the successor Order of Christ. This Portuguese connection would later influence the Age of Exploration, with ships bearing the distinctive Cross of Christ, evolved from the Templar emblem, venturing into the Atlantic under commanders trained in navigational techniques descended from Templar practices. By developing effective naval capabilities alongside their famous land forces, the Brotherhood demonstrated an integrated approach to medieval security operations that was centuries ahead of its time. Their comprehensive strategy, encompassing both domains, created the operational foundation for their rise to unprecedented power and influence throughout the Mediterranean world. While the martial prowess of the Templar Order drew the most attention from contemporaries, their most revolutionary innovation may have been financial rather than military. From humble beginnings protecting pilgrims' physical safety, the religious warriors evolved into guardians of their economic security as well, developing financial instruments and banking practices that transformed the medieval economy and established precedents still visible in modern finance. This transformation began with a practical problem. Medieval pilgrims traveling to sacred sites faced significant dangers beyond physical attack, chief among them the risk of carrying substantial wealth necessary for extended journeys. Gold coins and valuables made travelers conspicuous targets for bandits, even when successfully defended from robbery. Managing currency across regions using different monetary systems posed considerable challenges for medieval travelers. Recognizing these difficulties, the knight monks developed an elegant solution that would revolutionize medieval finance. A pilgrim could deposit funds at a commandery in their home country, receiving a document encoded with symbols intelligible only to officials of the order. Upon reaching their destination, the traveler would present this document to the local establishment and receive equivalent funds in local currency, minus a modest service fee. This system, a forerunner of modern letters of credit, dramatically reduced the risks of long-distance travel while generating operational income for the military order. The practical advantages of this arrangement proved immediately apparent to merchants and nobles, as well as religious pilgrims. As commercial activity expanded in the High Middle Ages, traders eagerly embraced this secure method for transferring funds between distant markets without physically transporting valuables. The network of these warrior bankers, stretching from Scotland to Cyprus, enabled commerce on a scale previously unimaginable, helping fuel the commercial revolution transforming European economic life. Royal houses quickly recognized the utility of such services for governmental operations. Medieval kingdoms typically lacked permanent financial institutions capable of managing state resources. Royal treasuries often consisted of little more than strong boxes, following the monarch from castle to castle, creating significant security and administrative challenges. The International Brotherhood offered an attractive alternative: secure facilities managed by literate administrators with standardized accounting practices and international reach. King Louis VII of France became an early adopter of these services, following his participation in the Second Crusade, where he had witnessed the financial competence of these monastic knights firsthand. Upon returning to France, he appointed one of their members as royal treasurer and began storing crown funds in their Paris headquarters. This arrangement established a pattern other monarchs would follow, particularly in England, where King John and later Henry III developed deep financial relationships with the military order. By the early 13th century, the Paris Temple functioned effectively as the French national treasury, with dedicated officials managing royal accounts separately from the organization's finances. The administrative infrastructure supporting these financial operations demonstrated impressive sophistication for its era. The Holy Warriors maintained standardized accounting practices across their international network, using double-entry bookkeeping methods not widely adopted in Europe until centuries later. Regular financial inspections by visiting officials from headquarters ensured adherence to these standards, creating unprecedented accountability. Their records distinguished clearly between organizational funds and client deposits, a concept of segregated accounts protecting customer assets that would later become fundamental to modern banking regulation. The financial expertise of these crusading bankers extended beyond simple deposit services to include functions recognizable as lending activities. While medieval church prohibitions against usury, charging interest, technically restricted lending practices, the order developed various arrangements that effectively provided credit while remaining within religious guidelines. Mortgage arrangements involving property transfers, exchange rate adjustments, and strategic fees all enabled capital deployment while avoiding direct interest charges forbidden to Christians. These credit facilities proved particularly valuable to European monarchs perpetually short of funds for military campaigns and governmental operations. When King Louis IX prepared for his crusade, substantial loans from the military brotherhood financed his expedition. Henry III of England repeatedly turned to their credit to address royal financial shortfalls. These high-profile lending relationships with ruling houses enhanced the order's political influence while generating income for their core missions. The physical infrastructure supporting these financial operations impressed contemporary observers. Major houses of the knightly order contained specialized treasury chambers with sophisticated security features. The Paris Temple featured a multi-story stone tower with walls several feet thick, accessible only through a single fortified entrance guarded day and night by the warrior monks. Within these secured spaces, iron-bound chests organized by region contained precisely documented valuables and financial records. These physical facilities represented the most secure storage available in medieval Europe, attracting deposits from those seeking unmatched protection for their wealth. Beyond physical security, this financial network offered additional advantages. Their literate membership maintained meticulous records in an age when literacy remained uncommon. Their international structure facilitated transfers between regions using different currencies and financial systems. Their religious status provided moral assurance of honest dealing, absent from secular financial operators. These combined benefits made their services attractive even to Jewish and Muslim merchants, otherwise suspicious of Christian institutions. The scale of their financial operations grew to remarkable proportions. When French officials later seized the Paris headquarters, they required weeks to inventory its contents, discovering substantial deposits from nobles, merchants, religious institutions, and foreign dignitaries, alongside royal treasures. Archaeological excavations of sites used by the order have unearthed specialized scales for precise coin weighing, seal matrices for document authentication, and accounting tokens used for complex calculations. Physical evidence of sophisticated financial operations. The banking functions of these warrior monks extended to estate management services that would today be considered trust and investment activities. Crusading nobles departing for extended periods often placed their entire estates under the administration of this trusted order. The Knight brothers would manage agricultural properties, collect rents, resolve tenant disputes, and deliver revenues, either to the owner's destination in the East or to designated family members remaining in Europe. These comprehensive services required considerable administrative sophistication, including legal expertise regarding property rights in various jurisdictions. Their financial operations generated substantial criticism alongside their popularity. Religious traditionalists questioned whether such worldly financial entanglements befitted a monastic organization dedicated to spiritual warfare. Secular moneylenders resented competition from an institution exempt from taxation and many commercial regulations. Jewish financial operators, previously dominant in European credit markets, found their traditional role increasingly constrained as Christian rulers turned preferentially to the services offered by these Christian bankers. The military order defended their financial activities as necessary extensions of their protective mission. Just as their swords guarded pilgrims' physical safety, their financial instruments protected travelers' economic welfare. Revenues generated through financial services supported their military operations defending Christian territories in the East. This pragmatic justification satisfied most contemporary observers, though tensions between spiritual ideals and commercial operations created ongoing internal debates within the Brotherhood. The sophistication of the financial practices developed by these monastic knights raises intriguing historical questions about their origins. Some scholars suggest possible influences from Islamic financial systems encountered during the order's Eastern operations. Muslim merchants had developed various credit instruments compatible with Islamic prohibitions against interest-bearing loans, creating potential models for adaptations by the Christian order. Byzantine practices may have provided additional influences, particularly regarding documentary forms used for commercial transactions. The Brotherhood's pragmatic approach to operational challenges made them receptive to adopting effective methods regardless of origin. Their financial innovations had particularly transformative effects on international trade. Before the banking services offered by these warrior monks, merchants conducting long-distance commerce faced daunting challenges converting currencies, securing funds during transit, and establishing credit in distant markets. The order's international network dramatically reduced these barriers, enabling commercial operations across previously prohibitive distances. This facilitation of trade contributed significantly to the commercial revival transforming European economic life during the High Middle Ages. The financial system, developed by the military brotherhood, reached its zenith during the latter 13th century, when they operated what amounted to an international banking network spanning much of the known Christian world. From England to Cyprus, from Scandinavia to Sicily, their commanderies provided standardized financial services to clients ranging from humble pilgrims to crowned heads of state. This financial infrastructure represented an institutional achievement unprecedented in medieval Europe, and unmatched until the rise of Italian banking houses centuries later. The ultimate fate of this financial empire would become inextricably linked with the broader institutional collapse of the Knight monks. Their role as creditors to the French crown, particularly the substantial debts incurred by Philip IV, would contribute significantly to the motivations behind their suppression. The spectacle of armed knights seizing the Paris temple in October 1307 represented not merely an attack on a religious order, but the forcible appropriation of what had effectively become a national financial institution. The legacy of financial innovations by this military religious order long outlived the organization itself. Banking procedures they developed continued through successor institutions, particularly Italian banking houses that filled the void left by their suppression. Concepts of documentary credit, international transfers, trust services, and secured deposits pioneered by the Brotherhood became standard features of European financial systems. Their pragmatic solutions to medieval commercial challenges established precedents still recognizable in modern banking practices. The transformation of warrior monks into international bankers represents one of history's most remarkable institutional evolutions. From humble beginnings, protecting travelers on dangerous roads, the Holy Brotherhood developed financial instruments that transcended physical security to address economic vulnerabilities. This expansion from physical to financial protection demonstrated the order's pragmatic adaptability and created an institutional legacy extending far beyond their military achievements. The knights who had mastered the sword proved equally adept at wielding financial instruments that would help reshape the medieval economy. The financial innovations described previously represented only one dimension of the warrior monks' broader economic impact. The Holy Brotherhood developed a comprehensive economic system, extending far beyond banking services to encompass agricultural management, industrial production, commercial transportation, and even early forms of economic statecraft. This integrated approach to resource management created a self-sustaining economic engine that powered their military and political activities across 2 continents. At the foundation of their economic empire stood vast agricultural estates donated by supporters throughout Europe. Unlike traditional monastic orders that operated their lands directly with lay brothers providing labor, the military order typically employed a manorial tenant system. Local farmers worked the lands under standardized leases, specifying rents, service obligations, and production arrangements. This administrative approach minimized personnel requirements, while generating steady income through cash rents, crop shares, and service commutations. Their agricultural operations reflected sophisticated understanding of productive efficiency. Estates managed by the knight monks pioneered crop rotation systems maximizing soil fertility. Their water management infrastructure, irrigation channels in Mediterranean regions, drainage systems in Northern Europe, increased productive capacity of their lands. Careful forest management ensured sustainable timber supplies for construction and shipbuilding. These systematic approaches to resource stewardship yielded agricultural productivity exceeding typical medieval levels. Livestock management represented another area of expertise for the crusading brotherhood. The order maintained extensive sheep flocks throughout their European territories, producing wool that entered international commercial networks. Their horse breeding operations served both military needs and civilian markets, with destriers bred by the warrior bankers commanding premium prices from European nobility. In Iberia, where the religious knights held extensive frontier territories, their cattle ranching operations developed techniques later used in colonial American ranching practices. Beyond primary production, the order established specialized industrial facilities, processing agricultural outputs into higher-value products. Water-powered mills ground grain, pressed oil, and fulled wool cloth. Wineries processed grapes from vineyards owned by the religious warriors into wines traded across Europe. Specialized workshops produced leather goods, ironwork, and textiles. These value-adding activities multiplied the economic productivity of their agricultural base, while reducing dependence on external suppliers for essential materials. The scale of these economic operations required administrative innovations uncommon in medieval society. The knightly order developed standardized accounting methods, applied consistently across their far-flung holdings. Regular inventories documented assets and production output. Annual financial reports flowed from local commanderies to regional centers and ultimately to headquarters, creating unprecedented visibility into operations across their international network. This administrative sophistication enabled informed resource allocation decisions impossible in typical medieval economic units. Regional economic specialization within their network demonstrated particular foresight. Recognizing varying comparative advantages, administrators from the Holy Brotherhood encouraged production of goods best suited to local conditions. Wool from English estates, olive oil from Mediterranean properties, grain from Central European lands, and timber from mountain regions all entered their internal distribution system, linking complementary production zones. This proto-industrial approach to regional specialization anticipated economic principles not formally articulated until centuries later. Their economic reach extended into urban environments as well as rural territories. Houses of the military religious order in major cities often controlled surrounding districts encompassing workshops, commercial buildings, and residential properties generating rental income. In London, their new temple complex included extensive commercial properties along Fleet Street. The Paris Temple controlled substantial urban real estate beyond its famous headquarters. These urban holdings provided both income and strategic positioning within important commercial and political centers. Commercial transportation formed another significant component of their economic system. Beyond their naval operations described previously, the Knight brothers maintained extensive overland transportation capabilities connecting their properties. Standardized way stations provided secure overnight facilities for their transport convoys. Their pack animals and wagons moved not only their own goods, but also commercial freight for paying customers, creating an early form of common carrier service. The security provided by armed escorts from the Order made their transportation services particularly valuable for high-value cargo. The integration of these diverse economic activities, primary production, processing, transportation, and financial services, created remarkable operational efficiencies. Grain from farms managed by the warrior monks might be processed at their mills, transported on their wagons to their ships, carried to distant markets, and sold through transactions financed via their banking services. This vertical integration minimized transaction costs and external dependencies, while maximizing returns from each economic activity. Their extensive economic operations required significant labor resources beyond sworn brothers. A complex hierarchy of associated personnel supported their activities. Tenant farmers working their lands, wage laborers in their workshops, specialized craftsmen maintaining their equipment, and clerical staff managing their records. These extended economic networks created employment ecosystems reaching far beyond formal membership, magnifying their economic impact throughout medieval society. The religious warriors developed distinctive approaches to labor management, reflecting both spiritual values and practical necessities. Their wage rates typically exceeded local standards, attracting skilled workers and reducing turnover. Work regulations specified safety practices and quality standards unusual for the period, while maintaining clear status distinctions between brothers and lay employees. Their operational practices demonstrated greater concern for worker welfare than most medieval employers, reflecting religious principles applied to economic relationships. Frontier economic development represented a specialized capability within their broader economic system. In contested regions like Iberia and Eastern Europe, the Order received extensive grants of underdeveloped territories, requiring significant investment before generating returns. They specialized in transforming these frontier zones into productive regions through systematic infrastructure development, clearing forests, constructing mills, establishing settlements, and building defensive works that enabled agricultural colonization. This frontier economic expertise made them particularly valuable to rulers seeking to consolidate control over newly acquired territories. The economic relationship between their European properties and Eastern operations reflected sophisticated resource allocation strategies. European commanderies operated partly as economic support bases for frontline activities in the Holy Land. A standardized percentage of European revenues flowed eastward, providing consistent financial support, regardless of immediate political conditions affecting traditional crusade funding. This reliable resource pipeline gave forces of the Holy Brotherhood significant operational advantages over other crusade participants dependent on sporadic funding from distant patrons. Their economic operations demonstrated remarkable resilience during periods of political upheaval. When military setbacks in the East disrupted normal economic activities, the knightly order could redirect resources through alternative channels within their network. This adaptability proved particularly valuable following the loss of Jerusalem, when their economic infrastructure continued functioning despite significant territorial adjustments. The distributed nature of their economic operations made them less vulnerable to localized disruptions than more centralized medieval institutions. The economic power generated through these integrated systems inevitably attracted political attention. Kings recognized the strategic value of an institution capable of rapidly mobilizing substantial resources across international boundaries. The French monarchy became particularly dependent on the economic capabilities of the warrior bankers. Using their administrative systems to collect taxes, their facilities to store royal valuables, and their financial expertise to manage crown finances. This economic entanglement with secular governance created political vulnerabilities that would eventually contribute to their downfall. Documentary evidence reveals sophisticated understanding of monetary principles unusual for their era. Financial administrators of the Brotherhood demonstrated clear comprehension of exchange rate mechanisms, depreciation effects, and capital preservation strategies. Their international operations familiarized them with diverse currency systems and their relative stabilities. This practical monetary knowledge informed their treasury management practices and client advice regarding value preservation during periods of currency manipulation by royal authorities. Archaeological investigations of sites used by the military order have uncovered physical evidence of their economic sophistication. Excavated storage facilities reveal standardized inventory management systems. Workshop remains show production line arrangements maximizing efficiency. Agricultural installations demonstrate water management technologies, increasing land productivity. These material remains confirm contemporary documentary evidence regarding their systematic approach to economic organization. The economic impact of their activities extended well beyond their own institutional boundaries. Regional markets developed around commercial centers established by the crusading knights. Transportation routes improved to accommodate their trading activities. Banking practices pioneered in their counting houses spread to secular commercial operations. Their economic innovations thus exercised influence far exceeding their direct operations, catalyzing broader economic development throughout medieval Europe. Their economic practices reflected pragmatic adaptation rather than theoretical innovation. Administrators of the religious warriors showed little interest in economic philosophy, but great concern for practical effectiveness. When existing methods proved inadequate for operational needs, they readily developed new approaches based on empirical observation rather than abstract principles. This practical orientation enabled rapid implementation of effective solutions without waiting for theological or theoretical justification. The economic dimensions of activities undertaken by the night monks have received less attention from historians than their military exploits. yet arguably left more enduring legacies. Long after their distinctive white mantles disappeared from battlefields, economic practices they pioneered continued influencing European commercial development. From banking procedures to estate management techniques, from transportation systems to workshop organization, their pragmatic solutions to medieval economic challenges established precedents that shaped subsequent institutional evolution. The Brotherhood's economic achievements demonstrated that their organizational genius extended well beyond battlefield discipline. The same systematic approach that made their military units so effective in combat enabled unprecedented economic coordination across vast geographical distances. Their practical integration of spiritual values with economic activities created a distinctive organizational culture capable of sustaining complex operations while maintaining essential religious character. This ability to operationalize abstract principles into functional systems across multiple domains represents perhaps their most remarkable institutional achievement. Behind the grand historical narrative of battles and banking lay the daily reality of individual knights in the Holy Order, men who had committed their lives to an extraordinary blend of monastic discipline and military service. Their daily experiences differed markedly from both traditional monks and secular knights, combining elements of both vocations into a unique way of life that shaped every aspect of their existence from dawn until nightfall. The most immediately visible distinction of these warrior monks was their appearance. Full members wore the famous white mantle symbolizing purity, prominently marked with a red cross after papal authorization of this emblem early in their history. Beneath this iconic garment, their clothing remained simple and functional. Woolen tunics, linen undergarments, and sturdy leather boots designed for practicality rather than display. Unlike the colorful finery of secular knights with personalized heraldry, Brothers of the Order presented a uniform appearance, emphasizing collective identity over individual distinction. This uniformity extended to physical appearance as well. The rule precisely specified grooming standards: haircut short to fit comfortably under helmets, beards neatly trimmed but never shaved completely in the style of secular fashion. These regulations served both practical military purposes and spiritual significance, visually separating brothers from worldly knights concerned with fashionable appearances. From a distance, an approaching group of the military religious brotherhood presented an instantly recognizable and somewhat intimidating uniformity of appearance. Daily life followed a rigorous schedule combining religious observances with military duties. Brothers rose before dawn at the sound of a bell calling them to matins, the first prayer office of the day. After these early prayers, they would attend Mass before breaking their night's fast with a simple morning meal. The remainder of morning hours typically focused on military training and equipment maintenance, with knights practicing formation riding, weapons handling, and battlefield communications. Midday brought the brothers back to their chapel for sext prayers, followed by the main meal of the day, eaten in the communal refectory. Dining in the order followed monastic traditions, modified for their martial requirements. Brothers ate in silence while listening to scriptural readings, seated according to rank along trestle tables. Unlike traditional monasteries with primarily vegetarian diets, the rule permitted meat 3 days weekly in recognition of the physical demands of military service. Portions remained moderate but adequate for maintaining physical strength. Afternoon activities varied based on location and specific assignments. Brothers stationed at frontier outposts might conduct reconnaissance patrols or escort travelers through dangerous territories. Those at major commanderies might oversee agricultural operations, train new recruits, or maintain defensive structures. Administrative duties occupied others, managing finances, corresponding with distant preceptories, or inventorying supplies. The integrated nature of operations within the Holy Brotherhood meant that knights regularly rotated through diverse responsibilities throughout their service. As evening approached, brothers gathered again for Vespers prayers before a light supper. After Compline, the final prayer office, the rule imposed strict silence until morning. Knights retired to dormitory accommodations reflecting their monastic vows, simple rope beds with straw mattresses arranged in communal sleeping halls rather than private chambers. Personal possessions remained minimal, typically limited to clothing, devotional items, and military equipment issued by the order, rather than personally owned. This daily rhythm varied somewhat between locations. Brothers serving in the East faced different challenges than those stationed at European commanderies. Frontier outposts maintained heightened vigilance, with knights sleeping fully clothed and ready for immediate response to alarms. Coastal installations coordinated with naval operations, while agricultural preceptories aligned schedules with seasonal farming requirements. Despite these variations, the fundamental pattern of alternating prayer and service remained consistent throughout the territories held by the knightly order. The monastic dimension of life in the warrior brotherhood extended beyond scheduled prayers to encompass comprehensive spiritual practices. Personal devotions, regular confession, and spiritual guidance from chaplain brothers formed essential elements of daily experience. The rule encouraged silent contemplation during routine activities, transforming mundane tasks into opportunities for spiritual reflection. Even military training incorporated religious dimensions, with weapons practice preceded by prayers dedicating these martial skills to righteous defense, rather than personal glory. Military training occupied a central place in daily activities, with techniques far more systematic than typical feudal practice. New recruits underwent standardized training, progressively building combat skills from basic horsemanship to complex unit maneuvers. Experienced knights regularly practiced formation riding, weapons handling, and tactical communications to maintain operational readiness. Unlike secular knights, who might train sporadically between hunting expeditions and court appearances, brothers of the military order engaged in daily martial practice as an integral part of their vocation. Equipment maintenance formed another regular component of daily responsibilities. The rules specified meticulous care for horses, weapons, and armor, not as personal property, but as sacred trust, enabling their protective mission. Brothers spent significant time inspecting gear for damage, cleaning metal components to prevent corrosion, and ensuring mounts received proper care. This systematic approach to equipment maintenance contributed significantly to battlefield effectiveness for the Holy Knights, with warriors entering combat using gear maintained to highest standards. Communal life within establishments of the religious order reflected careful balance between military hierarchy and monastic equality. While clear rank distinctions organized operational activities, the rule established practices emphasizing spiritual brotherhood regardless of status. All members ate the same foods, wore similar clothing, differentiated primarily by rank indicators, and participated in identical prayer obligations. This balance created a distinctive community, combining disciplined chain of command for military effectiveness with spiritual equality before God. Communication within this community followed carefully structured patterns. During meals and after evening prayers, strict silence prevailed in accordance with monastic tradition. Working hours permitted necessary operational communication, but discouraged idle conversation. Chapter meetings provided formalized opportunities for addressing community concerns, with brothers speaking in turn according to rank and seniority. This controlled communication environment reduced conflicts while ensuring necessary coordination for complex operations. Interactions with the world beyond establishments of the military brotherhood followed similarly careful regulation. The rule restricted casual contacts with outsiders, particularly women, who were barred entirely from houses of the order. When external duties required interaction with secular society, brothers typically traveled in pairs to ensure mutual accountability. These restrictions aimed at maintaining both moral discipline and operational security in an environment where the organization's growing wealth attracted constant attention. Entertainment and leisure, as understood in secular society, had little place in the life of these warrior monks. The rule explicitly prohibited hunting for sport, attendance at tournaments as spectators, and participation in secular celebrations. Physical recreation took practical forms like swimming for exercising horses, or targeted games developing combat-relevant skills. Leisure reading was limited to religious texts and operational materials, rather than popular chivalric literature enjoyed by secular knights. These restrictions reinforced separation from worldly values while maintaining focus on their spiritual military mission. Discipline within this structured community relied on graduated consequences for infractions. Minor violations like speaking during designated silence or negligent equipment maintenance typically resulted in additional prayers or temporarily reduced food rations. More serious offenses such as insubordination or leaving an installation without permission might bring corporal punishment or periods of isolation. The most severe violations, particularly those threatening the order's reputation or mission, could result in expulsion, effectively ending a knight's career and identity. Personal accounts from brothers of the religious knighthood provide glimpses into the lived experience behind these formal structures. A letter from Brother Ferrand to his family describes the transition from secular knighthood. My days, which once passed in idle hunts and vain displays, now find purpose in prayer and protection of those unable to defend themselves. Though my bed is harder and my meals plainer, my soul finds rest unknown in my former life. Such testimonies suggest that for many brothers, the order's discipline provided meaningful structure rather than merely oppressive restriction. Daily experiences varied considerably based on assignment within the extensive operations of the crusading brotherhood. A brother responsible for escort duties along pilgrim routes might spend weeks traveling between secure houses, maintaining constant vigilance against ambush attempts. Another assigned to financial operations might spend his days managing complex transactions across multiple currencies. A knight stationed at a frontier castle might alternate between construction supervision, local diplomacy with neighboring communities, and periodic patrol duties. This operational diversity provided varied experiences within the consistent framework of discipline maintained by the Holy Order. The international character of the knight monks created another distinctive aspect of daily life. Regular interaction with brothers from diverse European origins. A French knight might serve alongside Spanish, English, and German brothers, creating multilingual communities unusual for their era. While Latin provided a common language for religious observances and official communications, daily operations often required practical multilingualism. This international environment broadened perspectives beyond typical medieval experience, with brothers exchanging regional military techniques, administrative practices, and practical knowledge. Medical care represented another significant dimension of daily life in the military religious order. The Brotherhood maintained infirmaries staffed by brothers with medical training, providing care substantially better than typically available to secular knights. Preventive health practices received unusual emphasis, with regulations addressing hygiene, water quality, and appropriate clothing for different climates. These practical health measures contributed significantly to maintaining operational effectiveness in challenging environments, particularly in Eastern territories, where European forces often suffered from unfamiliar diseases. Seasonal rhythms introduced variations to this daily pattern. Major religious festivals like Easter and Christmas brought enhanced liturgical observances and rare feasting occasions permitted by the rule. Agricultural commanderies adjusted activities to accommodate planting and harvest seasons. Winter months in northern territories focused on indoor activities, including equipment repair, archival organization, and training sessions on specialized skills. These seasonal adaptations maintained productive activity throughout the year, while respecting environmental limitations. The psychological dimensions of daily life for members of the Holy Brotherhood reveal perhaps the most distinctive aspects of their experience. Brothers lived with remarkable cognitive dissonance, following monastic schedules focused on spiritual peace while simultaneously training for violent combat. They maintained vows of personal poverty while collectively administering vast wealth. They lived almost entirely among men while serving an order dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Navigating these contradictions required psychological adaptability that distinguished the mentality of these warrior monks from both traditional monastic mindfulness and secular knightly pragmatism. For new recruits, the transition to this distinctive lifestyle often proved challenging. The order developed systematic initiation processes, gradually introducing novices to the disciplines of the religious knights. Senior brothers provided mentorship through early adjustments, offering guidance based on their own experience, integrating seemingly contradictory demands. Historical records indicate some recruits abandoned the process, finding the order's disciplines too demanding, while others discovered in these same structures a profound sense of purpose previously lacking in secular knighthood. Throughout their history, the lived experience of individual knights in the warrior brotherhood remained remarkably consistent despite the order's institutional evolution. Whether serving during the humble early years or the height of the order's power, brothers followed essentially the same daily patterns established in their original rule. This consistency created intergenerational solidarity unusual in medieval institutions, with knights separated by decades experiencing fundamental kinship through shared daily practices. Even as the organization expanded into banking and territorial administration, the core experience of balancing prayer with protection remained the defining feature of daily life in the Sacred Brotherhood. This distinctive blend of monastic discipline and military service created a unique vocational identity, separate from either parent tradition. Neither quite monks nor conventional knights, brothers of the order occupied a third category, transcending traditional medieval social classifications. Their daily practices reflected this hybrid identity, combining contemplative silence with battlefield communication, ascetic simplicity with military effectiveness, personal humility with collective power. This daily reality, more than grand historical developments, defined what it truly meant to be a member of this extraordinary military religious order. The military contributions of the Templar Order extended far beyond routine escort duties and castle defense. Throughout their history, these warrior monks participated in virtually every major campaign to defend or expand Christian territories in the East. Their disciplined fighting methods, superior equipment, and unwavering courage made them invaluable assets in Crusader armies, otherwise characterized by inconsistent quality and divided leadership. From triumphant victories to catastrophic defeats, the Fighting Brothers featured prominently in the most significant engagements of the Crusader era. Their battlefield reputation developed rapidly following their early focus on road security. By the 1130s, just a decade after official recognition, contingents from the Holy Order began appearing in major field operations alongside royal forces. The Siege of Ascalon in 1153 marked their first prominent role in a large-scale engagement. This strategic coastal city had remained a Muslim enclave, from which Egyptian forces launched raids into Christian territories. Under Grand Master Bernard de Tremolay, Knights of the Religious Brotherhood spearheaded several assaults against the formidable defenses. Contemporary accounts describe a critical moment when a section of wall collapsed during bombardment, creating a potential breakthrough. Forces of the Knightly Order rushed forward to secure the breach, with the Grand Master reportedly among the first through the opening. What followed became a matter of historical controversy. Some chronicles claim Bernard and his knights advanced unsupported due to selfish desire for plunder, while accounts from the military order maintain they sought to establish a defensive position, allowing the main army to follow. Regardless of motivation, the small force found itself isolated within the city and overwhelmed by defenders. The Grand Master and approximately 40 knights died in the fighting. Their bodies recovered only when the city finally fell days later. Despite this setback, the Brotherhood's military contributions continued expanding through subsequent decades. Their disciplined forces proved particularly valuable, countering the growing power of Nur ad-Din, the Muslim ruler who unified previously divided territories across Syria and northern Mesopotamia. Castles of the warrior monks formed critical defensive positions, limiting his westward expansion, while their mobile forces participated in numerous skirmishes and raids along contested frontier zones. The Battle of Monk Jizad in 1177 witnessed perhaps the most celebrated military achievement of the religious knights. When Saladin invaded Christian territory, with an army estimated at 26,000 men, King Baldwin IV, the teenage leper king of Jerusalem, could muster only a few hundred knights and several thousand infantry. This dramatically outnumbered force included approximately 80 knights of the order, led by Odo de Saint-Amand, then serving as Grand Master. Contemporary accounts describe Baldwin's decision to attempt a surprise attack, rather than await reinforcements, with forces from the Holy Brotherhood forming the heavy cavalry spearhead. What followed stunned contemporaries on both sides. The Christian force achieved complete tactical surprise, with the knight monks smashing into Saladin's unprepared columns. The disciplined charge broke Egyptian formations, creating panic that spread throughout the larger Muslim army. By day's end, Saladin's force had disintegrated, suffering enormous casualties during their retreat across the desert. Christian chroniclers attributed this improbable victory partly to divine intervention, but emphasized the critical role played by the fighting quality and leadership of the military religious order. This triumph proved temporary, as the balance of power continued shifting toward Muslim forces consolidating under Saladin's leadership. The Brotherhood suffered significant losses in subsequent years, including the capture of Grand Master Odo de Saint-Amand following a defeat at Marj Ayoun. Unlike typical noble captives who could expect ransom, Knights of the Sacred Order refused exchange agreements, considering it their duty to fight to victory or death. This policy reflected both religious commitment and practical concerns about creating incentives for capturing rather than killing brothers in combat. The most catastrophic defeat for Christian forces, including substantial contingents from the warrior brotherhood, came at the Horns of Hattin in July 1887. This watershed battle resulted from strategic miscalculations by Guy of Lusignan, who had recently claimed the throne of Jerusalem. Against advice from the crusading knights, Guy marched his army across waterless terrain during extreme summer heat, allowing Saladin to choose favorable battleground. Sources suggest the fighting brothers counseled against this high-risk strategy, but ultimately followed the king's commands despite their reservations. As the Crusader army suffered from heat and thirst, forces from the military order and Hospitaller Knights formed the rearguard protecting its vulnerable flanks. When battle was finally joined, these military orders conducted desperate charges, attempting to break encirclement. Contemporary accounts describe waves of white-mantled knights launching attack after attack against Muslim lines, even as the main Crusader army disintegrated around them. By battle's end, nearly the entire contingent of holy warriors present had been killed or captured. The aftermath proved even more devastating. Unlike secular knights offered ransom opportunities, captured members of the religious brotherhood faced immediate execution. Saladin personally supervised the beheading of approximately 200 knights from both military orders, considering them the most dangerous opponents in the Crusader ranks. This targeted elimination of experienced brothers represented a devastating blow to Christian military capabilities in the region. Within months, Jerusalem itself fell to Saladin's forces, effectively ending the First Crusader kingdom. This catastrophe paradoxically enhanced the order's importance in remaining Christian territories. With secular forces devastated and many nobles captured, the military orders, with their independent financing and international recruitment networks, became the primary defensive bulwark for surviving coastal cities. Castles of the warrior monks formed critical strongpoints as Saladin's forces swept through formerly Christian territories. Their naval capabilities proved essential, maintaining supply lines to isolated outposts that would otherwise have been impossible to defend. The Third Crusade, launched in response to Jerusalem's fall, brought new opportunities for military contributions from the knightly brotherhood. When Richard the Lionheart's forces advanced down the Palestinian coast, contingents of the Holy Order served as both battlefield units and cultural interpreters for European commanders unfamiliar with local conditions. The Brotherhood provided specialized reconnaissance capabilities, guides familiar with difficult terrain, and advisors regarding Muslim fighting methods. Richard frequently positioned units from the religious warriors at critical points in his battle formations, recognizing their superior discipline and familiarity with regional warfare. During this campaign, the Fighting Brothers demonstrated their value beyond direct combat operations. Their financial network facilitated payments sustaining Richard's army after his treasury was depleted. Their linguistic capabilities enabled negotiation with Muslim forces when necessary. Their castles provided secure bases from which campaign operations could be launched. This multidimensional support proved essential to Crusader successes, limited though these ultimately proved in restoring Christian territories. The relationship between forces of the military religious order and other Crusader contingents often reflected complex tensions. Their battlefield discipline contrasted markedly with the individualistic approach of many secular knights seeking personal glory. Their strategic caution born from permanent presence in the region sometimes conflicted with the aggressive approach of European nobles, eager for rapid victories before returning home. These tensions occasionally erupted into open conflict, as when Grandmaster Gerard de Riedfort clashed with other Crusader leaders over tactical decisions. Gerard de Riedfort himself exemplified both the strengths and weaknesses of leadership within the Holy Brotherhood during this critical period. His personal courage was legendary. Contemporary accounts describe him repeatedly charging into seemingly hopeless situations, emerging unscathed while those around him perished. Yet his strategic judgment proved questionable on several occasions, most notably before Hattin, when he allegedly encouraged King Guy toward the disastrous confrontation with Saladin's forces. His complex legacy illustrates the challenges facing military leaders, balancing aggressive action against strategic prudence. The Fourth Crusade never reached the Holy Land, diverting instead to Constantinople, with consequences disastrous for Byzantine-Western relations. Involvement of the Knight monks remained minimal in this controversial campaign, with most brothers continuing to focus on defending remaining Butrama territories. This decision reflected their pragmatic commitment to their core mission rather than political entanglements. While European attention diverted elsewhere, the Fighting Brothers maintained their vigilant stance along increasingly threatened frontiers. Subsequent crusading efforts brought diminishing returns, despite continued participation by the religious knights. The Fifth Crusade, targeting Egypt, initially achieved significant success, capturing the port of Damietta, with forces from the military order playing important supporting roles. However, strategic overreach led ultimately to defeat in the Nile Delta, with the entire Crusader army nearly destroyed during a disorganized retreat. Throughout this campaign, the Brotherhood contributed specialized units while attempting, often unsuccessfully, to moderate the unrealistic ambitions of crusade leaders unfamiliar with regional realities. The Sixth Crusade, under Emperor Frederick II, achieved temporary restoration of Jerusalem through negotiation rather than combat, creating uncomfortable diplomatic compromises for military orders committed to more absolute positions. Leadership of the warrior brotherhood maintained skeptical distance from these arrangements, correctly anticipating their fragility. When Jerusalem returned to Muslim control a decade later, that caution appeared vindicated, though this stance created political tensions with imperial supporters. Throughout these fluctuating Crusader fortunes, the order maintained a consistent military presence when other forces came and went. Their permanent garrisons held strategic castles year-round, not just during active campaigns. Their naval patrols continued protecting sea lanes connecting coastal outposts. Their intelligence networks monitored Muslim military movements during periods of nominal peace. This persistent vigilance provided essential continuity through the episodic attention Western powers directed toward the Holy Land. Relations with Muslim adversaries evolved significantly through this extended conflict. While committed to defending Christian territories, experienced leaders of the religious knights developed nuanced understanding of their opponents' motivations and capabilities. Unlike newly arrived European nobles, who often viewed Muslims through simplistic religious categories, brothers stationed permanently in the region recognized the complex political divisions within the Islamic world and adjusted strategies accordingly. This pragmatic approach sometimes included diplomatic engagement and negotiated arrangements with particular Muslim rulers when strategic conditions warranted. The legendary warrior, Gerard de Riedefort, from the Holy Order, exemplified the Brotherhood's fighting spirit during its most challenging period. Rising to Grand Master despite humble origins, his courage inspired others, even as his strategic judgment sometimes proved questionable. After surviving the Hattin disaster, he was captured during the Siege of Acre, but later released, an unusual exception to Saladin's typical handling of prisoners from the military brotherhood. His death and subsequent fighting cemented his reputation for fearless commitment to the order's mission, Whether viewed as heroic example or cautionary tale of valor without wisdom, his career illustrated both the impressive fighting qualities and potential limitations of military leadership within the crusading order. As the 13th century progressed, changing military technologies and tactics required adaptation from an order initially designed around heavy cavalry operations. The Brotherhood incorporated crossbowmen, specialized siege engineers, and light cavalry scouts to complement their traditional knight contingents. Their castle designs evolved to counter improved Muslim siege capabilities, incorporating concentric defenses, specialized arrow slits for crossbow use, and more sophisticated defensive arrangements. This willingness to adapt, rather than merely preserve traditional methods, distinguished military effectiveness of the warrior monks from more conservative approaches. The final significant military contribution of the religious knights centered on defending Acre, the last major Christian stronghold in the Holy Land. As Muslim forces under Sultan Khalil completed their reconquest of remaining Crusader territories, Knights of the Order formed a critical component of the city's defenders. When Acre's walls were finally breached in May 1291, contemporary accounts describe fighting brothers among the last organized resistance. Their fortress held briefly after the city itself fell, allowing evacuation of some civilian residents before the structure collapsed under bombardment. The Grand Master, William of Beaujeu, died leading a counterattack during the final assault, embodying their commitment to fight rather than surrender. Following Acre's fall, surviving forces of the military brotherhood established temporary headquarters on Cyprus, from which they launched periodic raids attempting to maintain some Christian military presence along the Syrian coast. Their final military operation in the east centered on holding tiny Ruad Island, just offshore from the Syrian mainland. This isolated outpost fell in 1303, when Mamluk forces mounted a determined assault with overwhelming numbers. The captured garrison of holy warriors faced the Brotherhood's traditional fate, execution rather than ransom, marking the effective end of their military presence in the region they had been created to defend. Throughout nearly 2 centuries of continuous military operations, the order established a reputation for disciplined effectiveness, unmatched by other Crusader forces. Their distinctive combination of religious motivation and professional military capability created fighting units that contemporaries on both sides acknowledged as exceptional. From triumphant victories like Mungizarad to heroic last stands at Acre, their battlefield contributions represented the most sustained Western military commitment to the Crusader enterprise. Long after politically motivated crusades had come and gone, the fighting brothers maintained their vigilant defense of Christian territories until the final outposts became militarily indefensible. The fall of Acre in 1291 marked the final chapter of the Crusader state's 2-century presence in the Holy Land. This catastrophic loss represented the culmination of a long decline that transformed the Templar Order's mission and ultimately set the stage for their own downfall. Understanding this decline reveals how changing European priorities, Muslim resurgence, and internal Christian divisions gradually eroded what once seemed an enduring Western presence in the East. The seeds of this decline had been planted decades earlier, even during periods of apparent Crusader success. Following the Third Crusade, Christian holdings had been reduced to a narrow coastal strip, lacking the agricultural hinterland necessary for economic self-sufficiency. This territorial configuration created permanent vulnerability, with major settlements exposed to attack from multiple directions. Unlike the relatively defensible earlier Kingdom of Jerusalem, these fragmented coastal holdings required constant vigilance against enemies controlling the surrounding countryside. European enthusiasm for the crusading enterprise waned noticeably during the 13th century. The initial religious fervor that had motivated the First Crusade gave way to more cynical political calculations. Successive papal calls for new expeditions met increasingly skeptical responses from European monarchs focused on consolidating their domestic power. Those crusades that did materialize often diverted to alternative objectives, as when the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople instead of proceeding to the Holy Land. This shifting European perspective manifested in decreased willingness to commit significant resources to Eastern ventures. While earlier crusades had attracted the continent's most powerful figures, emperors, kings, and leading nobles, later expeditions drew less prestigious leadership and smaller forces. Louis IX of France remained a notable exception, mounting 2 major crusades, but his efforts highlighted the broader trend by standing out against the general disengagement of his royal contemporaries. For the military brotherhood, this European disinterest created mounting strategic challenges. Their operational model depended on continuous recruitment and resource transfers from Western preceptories to Eastern front lines. As European attention turned elsewhere, maintaining adequate frontier forces became increasingly difficult. Despite the order's independent financial resources, the Fighting Brothers found themselves shouldering ever greater defensive responsibilities with diminishing external support. Meanwhile, political developments in the Islamic world fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. The rise of the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt created a formidable new adversary for the remaining Crusader territories. Unlike previous Muslim powers divided by internal rivalries, the Mamluks established relative unity under efficient military leadership. Their professional slave-soldier system produced highly disciplined forces specifically trained for warfare against Crusader opponents. Under Sultan Baybars, who ruled from 1260 to 1277, Mamluk forces launched systematic campaigns against Crusader holdings. Each offensive followed careful strategic planning, rather than mere raiding, with clear objectives targeting the most vulnerable Christian positions. The brutal efficiency of these operations reflected Baybar's personal experience fighting Crusader armies and intimate knowledge of their weaknesses. His forces systematically reduced castles of the Holy Order, once considered impregnable, including the mighty Safed and Beaufort fortresses. The catastrophic Battle of La Forbie in 1244 foreshadowed the coming collapse. This devastating defeat, sometimes called the Second Hattin, saw the military orders suffer tremendous casualties while attempting to counter an Egyptian invasion. The Grand Master of the religious knights, Armand de Périgord, disappeared in the fighting, presumably killed or captured, along with hundreds of brother knights. This military disaster critically weakened defensive capabilities at precisely the moment when more formidable Muslim leadership was emerging. Internal divisions among Christian factions further undermined effective resistance to these growing threats. Commercial rivalries between Italian maritime republics, Genoa, Venice, and Pisa, repeatedly erupted into open warfare within Crusader ports. The resulting War of Sant Sarbus in Acre during the 1250s pitted Christian against Christian in street fighting so intense that Muslim observers reportedly expressed amazement at such self-destructive behavior. These conflicts diverted resources from external defense, while damaging infrastructure and undermining unified command. The military orders themselves contributed to this disunity through their own intense rivalry. Forces of the warrior monks and Hospitaller knights, though theoretically dedicated to the same cause, frequently pursued divergent strategies and competed for limited resources. At critical moments, this competition prevented effective coordination, between the two organizations best positioned to offer meaningful resistance to Muslim advances. Contemporary chroniclers recorded multiple instances where joint operations failed due to disagreements between order commanders, unwilling to subordinate their forces to rival leadership. The desperate strategic situation prompted increasingly risky political arrangements among the remaining Christian outposts. Alliances with Mongol forces against common Muslim enemies represented one such gamble. Leadership of the knightly order participated in diplomatic missions to Mongol rulers, exploring potential military cooperation, despite significant religious and cultural differences. These initiatives reflected pragmatic recognition that conventional crusader approaches had failed to stem the tide of Muslim reconquest. Loss of major inland fortifications forced defensive concentration around key coastal centers, particularly Acre. This largest remaining Crusader city became the final repository of Christian power in the region, hosting headquarters for both major military orders alongside various secular authorities. The resulting overcrowding created administrative confusion, with multiple jurisdictions claiming authority within the same confined space. Effective defense planning proved nearly impossible amid such competing power centers. Castle Pilgrim, Chateau Pèlerin, stood as a symbol of the Holy Brotherhood's persistent commitment, despite deteriorating circumstances. This massive coastal fortress, constructed with state-of-the-art defensive features, remained under control of the religious warriors, even as surrounding territories fell to Mamluk forces. Archaeological evidence reveals how the order continued improving its defenses until the final evacuation, reinforcing walls and adapting installations for use with the latest military technologies. This determined resistance illustrated their refusal to abandon their mission, despite increasingly hopeless strategic realities. The fall of Tripoli in 1289 marked the beginning of the final collapse. This major port city had served as a crucial supply hub for remaining Crusader territories and hosted significant facilities of the military religious order. Its capture by Mamluk forces under Sultan Kalawan left Acre isolated as the last major Christian stronghold on the mainland. Despite this clear warning of imminent danger, political divisions within Acre prevented effective preparation for the coming siege. Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil, succeeding his father Karlawan, assembled an enormous force specifically for Acre's reduction. Contemporary accounts describe an army numbering over 100,000 men, supported by the latest siege technologies, including massive trebuchets capable of hurling stones weighing hundreds of pounds. Against this overwhelming force, Acre's defenders could muster only a few hundred knights from the warrior brotherhood and Hospitaller order, along with several thousand infantry of varying quality. The siege began in early April 1291, with systematic bombardment of the city's formidable defenses. Knights of the Crusading Order conducted periodic sorties, attempting to disrupt Muslim siege works, but their limited numbers proved inadequate against the vast encircling force. By early May, multiple sections of the outer walls had been breached, forcing the defenders into desperate street fighting as enemy forces poured into the city. William of Beaujeu, the Grand Master of the Holy Knights, died leading a counterattack against one of these breaches, epitomizing the order's commitment to fight rather than surrender. As the city's defense collapsed, remaining forces of the military brotherhood withdrew to their fortress headquarters, which briefly held out after the city itself had fallen. This final strongpoint provided cover for civilian evacuation before ultimately being undermined and collapsing, reportedly killing hundreds of Mamluk attackers in its ruins. Surviving brothers of the religious order escaped by sea to Cyprus, establishing temporary headquarters on this island kingdom. From this offshore base, they conducted periodic raids against the mainland coast, attempting to maintain some Christian military presence in the region. The tiny island garrison they established at Ru'ad, just off the Syrian coast, represented their final foothold in the vicinity of the Holy Land. When this last outpost fell to a determined Mamluk assault in 1303, with the entire garrison of warrior monks executed after capture, their original mission effectively ended. The psychological impact of these defeats on the knightly brotherhood cannot be overstated. For nearly 2 centuries, defending the Holy Land had constituted their primary purpose and defining identity. The complete loss of Christian territories in the region raised existential questions about their continued role. Unlike the Hospitallers, who smoothly transferred their focus to Rhodes and developed a new maritime mission, the Knight monks struggled to redefine themselves after the catastrophic losses in the East. European reaction to these defeats reflected complex and contradictory attitudes toward the military orders. While officially lamenting the loss of the Holy Land, Western powers showed little practical interest in mounting effective recovery expeditions. Some critics implicitly blamed the holy warriors and Hospitallers for failing to prevent the collapse, despite their specialized defensive mission. This criticism conveniently overlooked the limited resources provided to these orders relative to the overwhelming forces arrayed against them. The geographic focus of the Sacred Brotherhood shifted dramatically westward, following these eastern losses. Previously, European commanderies had functioned primarily as support bases, channeling resources to frontline operations in Outremer. Now, with those front lines eliminated, the vast network of the religious knights throughout Europe represented an organization without its central purpose. Their extensive properties, banking operations, and administrative systems remained intact, but the military mission that had justified these resources no longer existed in its original form. Various proposals emerged for new crusading initiatives that might restore Christian presence in the Holy Land. The most developed of these plans came from Jacques de Molay, who became Grand Master of the Warrior Order in the aftermath of the Eastern collapse. His detailed memoranda to European rulers outlined potential strategies for a new expedition, emphasizing the need for adequate preparation, unified command, and strategic coordination absent from previous failed attempts. These proposals received polite acknowledgement but little concrete support from increasingly inward-focused European monarchies. The military brotherhood faced the additional challenge of competing vision from the Hospitaller Order, which advocated merging the military orders into a single organization under unified leadership. This proposal gained support from various European rulers and some church officials who saw advantages in consolidating these powerful institutions. Leadership of the crusading knights, particularly Jacques de Molay, strongly opposed such merger plans, insisting on maintaining their order's independent identity and distinctive traditions. Throughout this period of strategic reorientation, the religious warriors continued functioning as a major financial and administrative organization, with activities throughout Western Europe. Their banking operations served royal houses, their agricultural estates produced significant revenues, and their shipping interests remained active in Mediterranean commerce. Yet this continued institutional success contained hidden vulnerabilities, as their substantial wealth attracted increasing attention from cash-strapped monarchs, particularly Philip IV of France. The loss of their original mission created an organization with immense resources, but increasingly questionable purpose. Without active military operations in the East justifying their privileged position, the exceptional autonomy of the knightly order from secular authority appeared increasingly anomalous. Their extensive tax exemptions, legal immunities, and direct papal allegiance, arrangements developed to support their Holy Land mission became targets for criticism once that mission effectively ended. This period of uncertain identity, following the fall of Acre, thus established the conditions for their ultimate suppression. An organization created specifically for armed defense of Christian territories in the East now found itself without territories to defend. Their accumulated wealth, political influence, and institutional autonomy remained intact even as their founding purpose disappeared. This fundamentally unstable situation made the warrior monks vulnerable to the political machinations that would soon engulf them in Western Europe. The final irony of their decline in the East lay in the fact that their greatest defeats came not from personal failure, but from shifting strategic realities beyond their control. The Holy Brotherhood had maintained their defensive responsibilities with remarkable consistency throughout changing Crusader fortunes. Individual knights of the order had demonstrated exceptional courage in final defenses of doomed positions. Their organizational discipline had persisted even as secular crusading enthusiasm waned. Yet all this proved insufficient against the overwhelming political and military forces, gradually eliminating the Christian presence they had been created to defend. As the 14th century began, the military-religious order stood at a historical crossroads, an organization with an illustrious past but uncertain future. Their original mission lay in ruins, along with the fallen walls of Acre. Their accumulated resources remained formidable but increasingly disconnected from clear purpose. Their traditional political protectors showed diminishing interest in their proposed new crusading initiatives. These circumstances created the perfect vulnerability for the forces of secular authority, particularly the French crown, seeking to appropriate their wealth and eliminate their independent power. The Brotherhood that had survived 2 centuries of frontier warfare now faced entirely different threats emanating from the very European societies they had long served. Dawn broke over Paris on Friday, October 13th, 1307. As the city stirred to life, an extraordinary operation unfolded with clockwork precision. Royal officials bearing sealed orders moved systematically through the streets, accompanied by armed guards prepared for resistance. Their target, every knight of the Holy Order and facility within French territory. By nightfall, the most powerful military-religious order in Christendom had been decapitated in a single, devastating stroke. This shocking action represented the culmination of elaborate planning by King Philip IV of France, a monarch whose financial relationship with the warrior monks had evolved from dependence to resentment, and finally to predatory calculation. The arrests marked the beginning of a process that would transform the history of the Sacred Brotherhood, from operational reality to contested memory, from living institution to historical enigma. Understanding this tragic final chapter requires examining the complex motivations, accusations, and power dynamics that produced one of history's most notorious legal prosecutions. The immediate background to this catastrophe centered on Philip IV's financial difficulties. Known to contemporaries as Philip the Fair for his striking appearance, his fiscal policies had proven anything but equitable. Expensive wars with England and Flanders had depleted royal coffers. His previous financial expedients, debasing currency, confiscating Jewish property, taxing clergy against papal objections, had generated substantial resistance while providing only temporary relief. The enormous wealth controlled by the religious order presented an irresistible target for a ruler perpetually seeking new revenue sources. The king's relationship with the Brotherhood had once been close. Like his predecessors, Philip had utilized the financial expertise of the Knight monks, storing royal treasures in their Paris vault and appointing their officials to treasury positions. During a Parisian riot in 1306, the king had taken refuge in the temple fortress, protected by the same organization he would later destroy. This earlier trust made the subsequent betrayal all the more remarkable. Beyond financial motivation lay broader political calculations. The exceptional autonomy of the military brotherhood from secular authority represented a challenge to Philip's vision of centralized royal power. Their direct accountability to the Pope contradicted his efforts to establish monarchical control over all institutions within French territory. Their international structure created divided loyalties, potentially undermining national cohesion. Their extensive privileges established precedents limiting royal authority that Philip systematically sought to eliminate. The king found a perfect collaborator in Guillaume de Nogaret, his chief minister and legal strategist. Nogaret, a skilled jurist trained in Roman law, had previously orchestrated the audacious attack on Pope Boniface VIII at Anagni in 1303. This violent confrontation, intended to facilitate the Pope's forced abdication, demonstrated Nogaret's willingness to employ extreme measures against even the highest spiritual authorities when royal interests demanded. He applied this same ruthless approach to developing the legal framework for the suppression of the holy warriors. Nogaret's strategy centered on heresy accusations, the most serious charges possible in medieval jurisprudence. By categorizing the planned action as a matter of religious purification, rather than political convenience, Philip's government sought to neutralize potential papal objections, while justifying the seizure of assets belonging to the religious knights. The specific allegations combined traditional heresy claims with shocking elements designed to preclude public sympathy for the accused. These charges, detailed in arrest orders distributed to royal officials throughout France, painted a picture of an organization fundamentally corrupted from its original purpose. Members of the knightly order allegedly denied Christ during secret initiation ceremonies, spat upon the cross, engaged in inappropriate kissing rituals, worshipped idols, and permitted homosexual practices among members. Supporting these sensational claims were more procedural accusations regarding unauthorized absolution and financial corruption. Technical violations that lacked public shock value, but provided additional legal foundations for prosecution. The most infamous accusation involved alleged worship of a mysterious head or idol called Baphomet, a term whose origins remain contested among scholars. Some suggest linguistic corruption of Muhammad, implying Islamic influence, while others propose connection to Gnostic traditions or pagan fertility symbols. The mysterious nature of this charge enhanced its effectiveness, allowing accusers to present the crusading brotherhood as secretly devoted to incomprehensible and presumably diabolic practices hidden behind a facade of Christian piety. The timing of the arrests demonstrated remarkable coordination. Royal officials throughout France opened sealed orders simultaneously on the appointed morning, ensuring the military order had no opportunity to hide assets or organize resistance. Grand Master Jacques de Molay, who had been in France for consultations regarding a new crusade proposal, found himself seized alongside other senior officials at the Paris Temple. Within hours, warriors of the religious brotherhood throughout the kingdom were imprisoned, their properties secured by royal agents, and their records confiscated for examination. This swift action presented Pope Clement V with a fait accompli. The French-born pontiff, whose election had benefited from Philip's influence, received news of the arrests after they had already occurred. This tactical approach prevented papal intervention that might have protected an order directly answerable to Rome, rather than secular authority. The king's representatives justified their haste by claiming defense of the faith required immediate action, presenting the Pope with evidence supposedly confirming heresy within the ranks of the warrior monks. What followed represented medieval Europe's first systematic use of torture in a major political prosecution. Knights of the Holy Order, accustomed to battlefield hardships but unprepared for judicial brutality, faced professional torturers employing techniques designed to break both body and will. Strappado suspension, dislocated shoulders and arms. Foot roasting inflicted excruciating burns. Sleep deprivation and starvation weakened resistance over extended periods. These methods produced the confessions royal prosecutors required to validate their accusations. Jacques de Molay initially confessed under these conditions, acknowledging some charges while denying others. His statement, extracted after prolonged torture, provided crucial propaganda value for Philip's government. Royal publicists ensured this confession received widespread attention, undermining potential sympathy for imprisoned brothers. The spectacle of the order's supreme leader admitting corruption seemed to validate even the most extreme accusations against his subordinates. The scope of torture application appears nearly universal among arrested brothers. Historical records document few members of the military brotherhood in French custody who maintained complete denial through the interrogation process. Most eventually confessed to some subset of the charges, typically focusing on ceremonial elements like denying Christ or spitting on the cross, while rejecting more elaborate accusations regarding idol worship or immoral practices. The pattern of these confessions, similar in basic outline but varying in specific details, strongly suggests statements extracted under extreme duress rather than coordinated falsehoods. Pope Clement found himself in an impossible position. His theoretical authority over the sacred order demanded he protect them from secular interference. His practical dependence on French support, the papacy having relocated to Avignon within effective French control, limited his ability to challenge Philip directly. His personal background in southern France, where recent Catholic heresy suppressions had demonstrated the danger of religious corruption, made him susceptible to suggestions that even prestigious religious organizations might harbor secret apostasy. Attempting to regain control of the situation, Clement issued the bull Pastoralis Praeeminentiae in November 1307, ordering all Christian monarchs to arrest members of the knightly order within their territories. This papal directive effectively legitimized Philip's initial action, while extending the investigation throughout Christendom. By transforming a French judicial process into a church-sanctioned inquiry, Clement hoped to reassert papal authority over the proceedings, while demonstrating appropriate concern for potential heresy. Results outside France proved significantly different. Edward II of England initially resisted the arrests, before eventually complying with papal instructions. When members of the religious brotherhood in England faced interrogation without torture, illegal under English judicial practice, virtually none confessed to heretical activities. Similar patterns emerged in Aragon, Castile, Portugal, and German territories, where interrogations conducted without French-style torture methods generally failed to substantiate the sensational accusations. This geographical pattern of confessions correlating precisely with torture use suggests the fabricated nature of the charges. Within France, extended imprisonment and judicial pressure eventually broke even the most resistant brothers. Leaders of the warrior monks, recognizing the existential threat to their organization, attempted various defensive strategies. Some argued legal technicalities regarding proper judicial procedure. Others claimed confessions made under torture held no validity. A few managed to escape imprisonment and disappear into the countryside or neighboring territories. Most, however, remained caught in a judicial system designed to produce predetermined conclusions, regardless of factual reality. The prosecution received unexpected challenges when some imprisoned Knights of the Order recanted their confessions after initial torture ceased. In Paris, a group of defenders emerged willing to represent the military brotherhood against the charges, arguing procedural violations invalidated the entire process. This resistance prompted renewed torture application, with Philip's government determined to maintain the narrative of guilt, regardless of evidentiary problems. When dozens of brothers persisted in defending the order despite torture, authorities resorted to more permanent silencing methods. On May 12, 1310, 54 Knights of the Holy Order, who had recanted confessions and volunteered to defend the organization, were burned at the stake as relapsed heretics in a field outside Paris. This mass execution dramatically demonstrated the consequences of challenging the royal prosecution. Subsequent defense efforts collapsed as remaining brothers recognized the futility and mortal danger of resistance. The message proved unmistakable: confession offered the only path to survival. While the legal proceedings continued through elaborate formalities, the practical dissolution of the religious knights advanced rapidly. Royal administrators inventoried and assumed control of properties belonging to the warrior brotherhood throughout France. The extensive banking operations, agricultural estates, urban facilities, and accumulated treasures fell under crown management. Though official disposition of these assets remained technically undetermined while trials continued, their effective transfer to royal control occurred immediately following the arrests. The Council of Vienne, convened in 1311 to address the question of the military order, alongside other church matters, demonstrated Clement's continuing ambivalence. The assembled church leadership reviewed evidence from various regional investigations, revealing the inconsistent results between territories using torture and those following more traditional judicial procedures. When several hundred representatives of the knightly brotherhood unexpectedly appeared offering to defend the order, the Pope suspended proceedings rather than allow direct challenge to the French narrative. Philip forced resolution by personally traveling to Vienne with a substantial military escort, effectively intimidating the council into compliance with his demands. Clement, recognizing his practical inability to resist French pressure, issued the bull Vox in excelso in 1312, suppressing the warrior monks through administrative papal authority rather than formal condemnation. This technical distinction allowed dissolution without definitively declaring the entire order heretical, a face-saving compromise, permitting the Pope to maintain some appearance of independent judgment. A subsequent bull, ad providam, allocated most properties of the crusading brotherhood to the Hospitaller order rather than secular authorities. In practice, however, this transfer occurred incompletely, particularly in France, where Philip retained substantial portions of wealth from the religious order through claims of administrative costs and debts allegedly owed to the crown. The practical outcome aligned with the king's financial objectives, while maintaining nominal adherence to the principle that religious assets should remain in religious hands. The final act in this tragedy centered on the fate of Jacques de Molay and other senior leaders of the military religious order, held in extended imprisonment throughout the lengthy proceedings. In March 1314, the Grand Master and Preceptor of Normandy, Geoffroy de Charny, were brought before Notre Dame Cathedral for public announcement of their sentences: life imprisonment based on previous confessions. What followed stunned onlookers and precipitated the final tragedy. Standing before the assembled crowd, both men suddenly recanted their confessions, declaring the sacred brotherhood innocent of all charges, and attributing their previous statements solely to torture. This dramatic reversal left church officials in disarray, but prompted immediate response from Philip, who declared the pair relapsed heretics without further judicial process. That same evening, the two leaders were burned at the stake on a small island in the Seine, maintaining their claims of innocence as flames consumed them. Legend records de Malay's final words as a curse upon those responsible for his unjust execution, summoning both Philip and Clement to meet him before God's judgment within the year. When both the king and pope died within months of the execution, Clement from illness in April, and Philip from a hunting accident in November, many contemporaries saw fulfillment of this prophetic denunciation. This dramatic conclusion cemented the story of the Holy Knights in popular imagination, transforming judicial murder into the stuff of legend. The suppression represented a watershed in European power relations between secular and religious authority. A monarchical government had successfully destroyed an international religious organization despite its direct papal protection. The legal mechanisms employed, particularly the use of heresy accusations to justify property seizures, established dangerous precedents for future deployments of judicial power against inconvenient institutions. The practical demonstration that sufficient violence could extract confessions supporting any desired narrative revealed fundamental weaknesses in medieval judicial processes. For the thousands of surviving brothers outside the immediate French orbit, the suppression created profound personal displacement. Men who had dedicated their lives to a religious vocation suddenly found themselves without institutional identity. In most territories, they received modest pensions, drawn from former properties of the warrior brotherhood, typically conditional upon residence in other religious houses where they could be monitored. Their distinctive white mantles disappeared, their communal life ended, and their shared mission dissolved through administrative decree rather than battlefield defeat. The dramatic suppression of the Knights Templar marked not an ending, but a transformation. Though the organization ceased to exist as a functioning institution, its influence continued through multiple channels that have shaped the subsequent 7 centuries of history, myth, and cultural memory. From successor organizations to banking practices, from architectural monuments to popular legends, the legacy of the warrior monks endures across diverse domains of human experience. The immediate aftermath of suppression varied dramatically across Europe. While the French crown achieved its objective of seizing substantial assets from the military brotherhood, other monarchs followed different paths. In England, Edward II eventually complied with papal directives, but transferred most properties of the religious knights to the Hospitallers as officially mandated. Iberian kingdoms demonstrated particular creativity in managing the transition. In Portugal, King Dinis negotiated the creation of the Order of Christ, effectively preserving the organization under a new name, with the same members, properties, and essential structure. A transformation that received papal blessing in 1319. This Portuguese continuation would later play a significant role in maritime expansion during the Age of Discovery. Under Prince Henry, the navigators' leadership as governor of the Order of Christ, their extensive resources supported Portuguese explorations along the African coast and eventually across the Atlantic. Ships bearing the distinctive cross of the Order, evolved from the emblem of the Holy Brotherhood, carried explorers to new continents. The navigational expertise, developed partly from earlier maritime operations of the Knight monks, contributed to these voyages redefining European understanding of global geography. In Spain, resources of the Sacred Order were divided among several successor organizations, including the orders of Montesa and Santiago. These military brotherhoods continued defending Christian territories against remaining Muslim enclaves on the Iberian Peninsula, eventually participating in the final conquest of Granada that completed the Reconquista. Similar transitions occurred in scattered territories across Europe, with regional arrangements reflecting local political conditions rather than standardized dissolution processes. The Hospitallers, as the primary institutional beneficiaries of properties once held by the crusading knights, expanded significantly following the suppression. Their subsequent defense of Rhodes and later Malta against Ottoman expansion represented continuation of the crusading ideal that had motivated the warrior brotherhood throughout their existence. Many former carcels and commanderies of the religious order simply changed management, while maintaining their original defensive functions under these new administrators. The architectural legacy of the military religious order remains visible in structures scattered across Europe and the Near East. Their distinctive round churches, modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, survive in London, Paris, Toma, and other European cities. Massive carceral fortifications they constructed still dominate landscapes from Syria to Scotland. These physical remains offer tangible connection to their historical presence, while archaeological investigations continue uncovering new details about their daily operations across these widespread facilities. The financial innovations pioneered by administrators of the knightly order outlived their suppression through adoption by successor institutions. Their banking practices influenced emerging Italian banking houses that expanded international finance in subsequent centuries. Documentation methods, credit instruments, and trust arrangements they developed became standard features of European commercial operations. The concept of international banking networks providing standardized services across political boundaries, first fully realized in operations of the Holy Warriors, became fundamental to modern financial systems. The legal proceedings against the religious brotherhood established unfortunate precedents repeated throughout subsequent European history. The use of torture to extract confessions, supporting predetermined narratives, reappeared in later witch trials, inquisitorial proceedings, and political purges. The deployment of heresy accusations to justify property seizures became a recurring strategy when authorities sought to eliminate wealthy organizations. These procedural innovations represented perhaps the darkest aspect of the legacy left by the warrior monks. Institutional techniques of persecution refined through their suppression. Popular imagination transformed the history of the night monks into legend almost immediately following their dramatic end. Jacques de Molay reported curse against his persecutors, seemingly fulfilled when both Philip and Clement died within the year, captured medieval audiences and established the narrative framework of unjust persecution, followed by supernatural retribution. Tales of secret survival flourished, with stories of knights from the military brotherhood escaping to Scotland, Switzerland, or remote Atlantic islands, carrying their supposed treasures and arcane knowledge. These legends found particular resonance in Scottish history through claims connecting the Holy Knights with the Battle of Bannockburn, fought shortly after their suppression. According to these traditions, knights fleeing French persecution provided crucial assistance to Robert the Bruce, contributing to his decisive victory against English forces. While lacking contemporary historical documentation, these stories established enduring links between the mythology surrounding the religious warriors and Scottish national identity, later reinforced through claimed connections to Freemasonry. The Masonic fraternity, emerging publicly in early 18th century England, incorporated themes from the military order into its symbolism and ritual structures. Higher degrees in some Masonic systems explicitly claimed descent from the warrior brotherhood, presenting the medieval order as guardians of esoteric wisdom, subsequently preserved within Masonic traditions. While serious historians find little evidence supporting direct organizational continuity, these associations firmly embedded imagery of the crusading knights within Western esoteric traditions that continue influencing contemporary spiritual movements. Modern popular culture has further expanded the presence of the Holy Order in collective imagination. From Indiana Jones to Assassin's Creed, from the Da Vinci Code to countless historical novels, the white-mantled knights have become ubiquitous symbols of medieval mystery and hidden knowledge. Their dramatic historical arc, from humble origins to extraordinary power to catastrophic fall, provides irresistible narrative structure for storytellers across media platforms. This cultural afterlife has arguably extended their influence far beyond what they achieved during their actual institutional existence. Academic historians continue finding new perspectives on the history of the religious knights through archival discoveries and archaeological investigations. The recovery of transcript evidence from their trials offers insights into medieval judicial procedures and political machinations. Excavations at sites once occupied by the military brotherhood reveal details about their daily operations impossible to reconstruct from documentary sources alone. Comparative analysis situating them within broader historical patterns of religious military orders illuminates both their distinctive characteristics and shared features with similar institutions. The enduring fascination with the history of the warrior monks reveals deep currents in Western cultural consciousness. Their story encapsulates fundamental tensions between religious idealism and practical power, between institutional authority and individual commitment, between mystical spirituality and martial discipline. These contradictions, embodied in the paradoxical figure of the warrior monk, continue resonating with audiences seeking to understand how spiritual values interact with worldly realities. From 9 knights pledging to protect pilgrims on dangerous roads, to an international institution controlling vast resources across 2 continents, their institutional journey demonstrates both the potential and peril of organizations combining religious motivation with worldly power. Their rise exemplifies how focused purpose and disciplined structure can achieve extraordinary institutional development. Their fall illustrates how accumulated wealth and privileged autonomy inevitably attract predatory attention from competing power centers. The legacy of the Knight monks ultimately transcends both the hagiographic admiration of uncritical enthusiasts and the reductive skepticism of institutional critics. Their actual historical significance lies in multiple dimensions: military innovation, financial development, architectural achievement, and organizational design. They pioneered international institutional structures in an age of fragmented local authorities. They developed practical solutions to complex logistical challenges. They demonstrated how religious values could motivate and sustain organizational discipline across diverse environments. 7 centuries after Jacques de Molay's execution, the cross-emblazoned white mantle of the Holy Knight retains powerful symbolic resonance, whether viewed as exemplars of religious dedication, victims of political persecution, pioneers of international banking, or guardians of mysterious wisdom. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon continue occupying unique position in Western historical consciousness. Their remarkable story, from humble beginnings through extraordinary growth to dramatic suppression, remains an essential chapter in understanding how medieval society organized its highest ideals and confronted its deepest contradictions. The final irony of the history of these religious warriors may be that an organization created to defend physical territory ultimately achieved its most enduring influence through intangible legacies, institutional models, financial innovations, architectural principles, and symbolic resonance. Long after the walls of Acre crumbled and the temple fortress was demolished, the organizational patterns they established and the cultural imagination they inspired continue influencing how we structure our institutions and understand our past. The legacy of these warrior monks extends far beyond the territories they once defended, into realms of history, legend, and cultural memory they could never have anticipated during that 2 centuries of operational existence.